Chapter 1519. In the vast void, figures stepped through the air and landed on Uni Peak. At this moment, the empty space in Uni Training Hall was gradually filled with figures. No one from the peaks remained. From the peak elders to the chief disciples, everyone had gathered here. The scene was awe-inspiring. In the training hall, the disciples of each peak were arranged in 6 square formations. The 6 formations stood side by side, each with a different aura. Taiwei Peak's formation was filled with the aura of the great path of life. Uni Peak's formation was like a large formation. The formation light above the formation shone brightly. The disciples of Yaowang Peak were elegant. There seemed to be a resonance between them. If one listened carefully, one could faintly hear a beautiful melody. However, when one listened to it again, it was silent. Daozong Peak cultivated tens of thousands of techniques and had many disciples. Their auras were mixed. The Mizar Peak Master's great path of slaughter was met with a fierce murderous aura that made one tense up. The disciples of the mysterious Heaven Peak all carried hammers on their backs. They were steady, mellow, and gave off a sense of peace. However, their quiet bodies seemed to contain a powerful force that could shatter the heavens and shatter the earth. The disciples of the 6 peaks were orderly. They all stood facing the front of the training hall. In front of the training hall, there was a solemn platform. The 7 peak elders stood in the center. The elders of each peak were lined up in order. The previous chief and the second chief stood at the 2 sides of the platform. They were like 2 groups of guards standing respectfully. At this moment, Qin Hao was also in the chief's team. He was the only disciple in this year's Migres Palace. No one competed with him for the position of chief. After today's sparring session, he would inherit the position of Eastern Sky. Naturally, he had to stand with the chief of each peak. Moreover, if he stood alone in the training hall, he would appear lonely and eye-catching. Figures continued to descend from the sky and arrived at the Dao field. Qin Hao stood beside Dong Tian with his hands clasped behind his back and his chest puffed out. He looked extremely calm, but in fact, he was panicking in his heart. At this moment, every nerve in his body was stretched taut as he stood in the Dao field. Above his head was a Nirvana-level Grand Array. That terrifying power could flatten everything in an instant, obliterating all the disciples of the 7 peaks. At this moment, Qin Hao felt as though he had returned to the God Burial Valley and was trapped in the 9 Heavens God's Punishment Array. He felt as though he would die in the next second. Wait for death. I can't wait for death. I can't wait for death in this lifetime. Qin Hao scanned the crowd in the training hall, looking at Xiao Han, Zhou Wu Dao Shou Wuk, Yishui Han, Xiaogua, and so on. His true love, brothers, and family were all in the training hall. He was no longer alone. In his previous life, he had fallen into the God-punishing array. It was his bad luck. So what if he died? However, if something were to happen today, he would not be the only one to die. Everyone would be buried in this training ground. He had to resist, especially since he couldn't contact Miori. He had to do something to prevent himself from being caught off guard when danger came. Regardless of whether what he did was useful or not, at least he would feel more grounded. Even if he was wrong in the end and the Peak's sovereign punished him, he would have to take the blame. Shou Wuk and the others secretly exchanged glances with Qin Hao. In truth, they were all very nervous. After all, the news they received was too shocking. No matter what the outcome was, today would be the most unforgettable day of their lives. At the intersection of Uni Peak and Alchemy Peak, in the depths of a valley surrounded by mountains. In the center of the valley, there was a steep stone platform. It was like a giant stone pillar that extended into the air. At the top of the pillar sat an unyielding figure. This figure had a head of messy white hair that fluttered in the wind. He was motionless like a statue. His face was calm and his fists were clenched. At this time, the power of thunder flashed and flowed along the stone walls. Finally, it gathered in the air of the valley and turned into tribulation thunder. With a loud crack, a bolt of lightning struck down, striking the body of the stone pillar. Chang'e Lo trembled. He didn't resist. He allowed the thunder to wreak havoc throughout his body, causing his bones to creak as he remained motionless. Then, a fiery light burned down like a fire dragon, wrapping around the stone pillar, swallowing him up. His expression didn't change. Even though his body was burning red, he still didn't resist. He allowed the fire to burn him. Cold wind and snow, sharp wind blades, sweeping waves, they struck the stone pillar again and again, crashing into Changhe Lo's body. Different strengths wreaked havoc within his body. The power of the great Tao, formed by the array formation, brought him unimaginable pain. His cultivation was sealed, and he could only withstand it with his body. On the day he returned from the trial, he had been imprisoned here. The Dustfall platform was covered in 8 layers of enchantments. At all times, it would be struck by thunder and burned by fire. I wonder what great day it is today. Changhe Lo's messy silver hair parted. He looked up, revealing a scarred face as he looked up at the skies. Outside the enchantment, he could faintly hear some noise. Presumably, the Divine Palace was holding another great opportunity for their disciples to sublimate themselves. Unfortunately, he couldn't participate, nor could he participate. Was he wrong? Being struck by thunder, burned by fire, flooded by water, and frozen by ice, he still didn't think he was wrong. He couldn't change his humble birth, but he had the opportunity to change his future. He was unwilling to be mediocre and was determined to climb up. He only wanted to stand at the peak of martial arts and sweep away dangers and obstacles. This was the instinct of a warrior. Even if his methods were despicable, what was wrong with that? But it seemed that his way of doing things wasn't recognized. It was like this in the outside world and in the Divine Palace. No one could empathize with him. No one would think for him. During this time, even the people of the Xianyuan family hadn't come to the Dustfall platform once. Not even one person was willing to come and see him. Was this the treatment of Xianyuan Wu Ying's adopted son? Changhe Lo sneered. It turned out that he had always been alone. Buzz! Suddenly, there was a vibration of power from above. It was extremely tyrannical. The thunderbolts that were about to converge above Changhe Lo's head were swept by this power and instantly disintegrated. A dazzling brilliance spread over the top of his head, and the enchantment above the Dustfall platform was opened. Then a bright figure descended from the sky, like a goddess of the 9 heavens slowly descending. Her body was surging with incomparably powerful holy light. She came to the same height as the stone pillar, and a pair of flawless beautiful eyes looked calmly at Changhe Lo. Master! Changhe Lo's heart trembled, and he looked slightly surprised. Come out. Go to the Uni Peak to participate in the 7 Peaks Tao discussion ceremony. Yao Guangxianjun said. She waved her palace robe, and a divine halo descended upon Changhe Lo's body, washing away the dust on him. When the halo dissipated, Changhe Lo was wearing a pure, white Yao Guang palace robe. The traces of wind and frost on his face had all disappeared, and he had regained his handsome appearance. Master asked you to let me out? Changhe Lo asked. Is the imprisonment period over? No, I just couldn't bear to see you miss the handover ceremony of the 2 chief disciples, so I let you out first. After the Tao discussion, you still have to return to the Dustfall platform until Master Gong truly releases you. Yao Guangxian Jun said slowly. This day was very important to the disciples of the 7 Peaks, and was equally important to Changhe Lo's future. He had a chance to change his fate. Let me out temporarily? Changhe Lo shook his head. What's the point? Master, please go back. With that, he sat back down on the stone pillar. Yao Guangxianjun was not under the orders of Geezer Tian Quan, but had made the decision on her own. Since that was the case, he would not leave. He would only leave when Geezer Tian Quan personally released him. Yao Guangxianjun frowned slightly. You don't want to be the chief disciple of the Yao Guang Peak. If that's the case, why did you come to the Divine Palace? Stepping into the Divine Palace was to surpass oneself and cultivate the Tao of the Great Emperor that no cultivator of the outside world could reach. There were 4 levels of the Tao of the Emperor, and each level was a whole new level. In the illusory palace trial, in order to get rid of Qin Hao, you would rather poison Lan Qingwu and Su Jin and drag the disciples of Xintian Peak Mizar Peak, and Daozong Peak down with you. Wasn't it all so that you could go further and see the scenery from a peak that no one else could? Now the opportunity is right in front of you. The position of chief disciple is close at hand. As long as you fight for it, you can inherit my legacy in the future. You want to give it up? Yao Guang asked Changhe Lo. Changhe Lo raised his head, looked at the sacred and inviolable Yao Guang Peak Master, and asked, Master, do you think I've done anything wrong? Yao Guang stared at Changhe Lo. She stared at him for a long time until Changhe Lo couldn't take her gaze anymore and looked away. Only then did Yao Guang slowly take in a deep breath and sigh. How can one truly differentiate between right and wrong on the path of cultivation? It's all about one's own effort. To not be manipulated by others, to not live under others' roof, to fight against fate, to fight against the heavens, to break the 6 paths of reincarnation, to one day surpass all living beings. However, cultivation is the Tao. Why do you cultivate? Who do you cultivate for? Just for yourself? Yao Guang, immortal monarch, turned around and slowly flew into the sky above the valley. Life is too short. Even the Nirvana Great Emperor has a limited lifespan. Perhaps living doesn't mean only cultivation. It's not bad to stop occasionally and look at the scenery around you. Like me, I teach a few disciples in my spare time, even though you killed 2 of them. Now that your shackles have been removed and your cultivation has been restored, the barrier above Fallen Dust Valley will be restored in 10 breaths of time. Whether or not you want to participate in the Tao debate is up to you. With that, Yao Guang's aura returned to Cloud East Training Hall. Lan Qingwu was dead. Su Jin's soul had been changed, and she'd lost 2 beloved disciples. How could she not feel pain? Even though the Nirvana Great Emperor had severed her desires, she was still human. But what could she do? Kill Changhe Lo and avenge her dead disciples? Changhe Lo was also her disciple. Just like how she'd accepted Guden, why couldn't she give Changhe Lo another chance? Yao Guang left, but her words struck deep into Changhe Lo's heart. Why do you cultivate? Who do you cultivate for? What is your original intention? Is it only for yourself? Perhaps it's not bad to stop and look at the scenery around you. I'll fight the Tao debate on behalf of my master. Rumble. In the void, a layer of transparent ripples began to converge towards the center. The instant the barrier closed, Changhe Lo, who was sitting on the stone pillar, suddenly burst forth with primordial chi. Like a beam of light, he shot into the sky. The moment he rushed out of the barrier, his state of mind became clear, as if it had been cleansed. The haze in his heart was removed, and he felt unprecedentedly relaxed. Even his breathing was incomparably smooth. His body was burning with an extremely firm and indestructible power. This power didn't come from him, but rather from Yao Guang's will. It was the first time he'd realized that fighting and working hard for others could be so powerful. Chapter 1520. Cloud Change Peak. More and more figures gathered in the training field, but it wasn't chaotic. Every figure that landed would automatically integrate into the 6 square formations, standing respectfully until not a single trace of human energy could be felt from the other 6 peaks. On the left side of the platform, Qin Hao stood quietly in the middle of the formation of the chief disciples. Everyone else's attention was on today's session. The low-level disciples hoped to rise in status and rank through their performance. The personal disciples wanted to compete for the chief disciple position and fight for the 12 divine soldier. As for Qin Hao, he remained unmoved. He was now worried about his life and death. He had a feeling that today's session was unusual and something big was going to happen. His uneasiness grew stronger and stronger. He had his own plan and would not let the crisis come and wait for death. But he could not guarantee that his plan would succeed and prevent the unknown danger. It depended on how the others performed. At this moment, there was an extremely fast, ear-piercing sound in the void. 2 streams of light, one in front and one behind, flew into the training ground one after another. The first figure was Yao Guang Fairy Lord. The person behind her was Changhe Lo. Yao Guang Fairy Lord returned to the platform and sat back down. Tian Quan did not say anything and continued to chat with old man Daozong, as if he did not see Chang Hello enter. Chang Hello was punished on the fallen dust platform, but now that Yao Guang had personally brought him here, Tian Quan naturally could not drive him away. He was the master of the Divine Palace and was not so narrow-minded. On the other hand, the disciples of Yao Guang Peak looked a little unnatural when they saw Chang Hello return, but they did not say anything. Occasionally, a few disciples would sneer, which was quite harsh to the ear. Everyone is here. Master, the Tao discussion can begin. Eastern Sky stepped forward and said. Tian Quan nodded and straightened his posture. His eyes swept across the training ground, and his voice was as loud as a bell. Ancestors, since the establishment of the Divine Palace, there have been 100 sessions. We have nurtured countless disciples and passed down the teachings of martial arts. His voice was unusually forceful and spread out from the training ground of Uni Peak to the 7 Peaks. It resounded throughout the Divine Palace, and its power swept in all directions. However, after Ancestor Wu Jun, no one from the Divine Palace has ascended to the divine level. It is a great regret, and also a regret for the martial arts of the Divine Wilderness. Today, I am the current master of the Celestial Palace, the leader of the Migres Palace, and the 819 disciples of the Nurturing God Palace. I have inherited the grand aspirations of the ancestors and passed down the spirit of the martial way. My disciples have succeeded and are here to discuss the Tao. I hope that the ancestors will protect me and our orthodoxy will last forever. Thank you, Peak Venerables, for your guidance. Whoosh! More than half of the disciples in the training ground. These people were all disciples of the Divine Palace, disciples of the Divine Palace. But once they stepped out of the Divine Palace, they were no longer people of the Divine Palace. According to the rules of the Ancestral Palace, in the secular world, you are not allowed to announce that you have cultivated in the Divine Palace, and you are not allowed to use the name of the Divine Palace to stir up trouble. Migra stood up and said, Heavens! The 6 Peak Masters stood up at the same time. Waves of Nirvana realm, aura, shot up to the sky and swept through the world. The endless power turned into the power of the heavens, intimidating the disciples present. The terrifying will seem to be engraved into everyone's soul, making them tremble. Those who violate this will be destroyed by the heavens and earth. Everyone who knelt said in unison and swore to the heavens. You can't say that you have cultivated in the Divine Palace, and you can't use the name of the Divine Palace to cause trouble. It's just like what Uncle Xiao, he said to me before I came. Qin Hao recalled, the number 1 array emperor of the northern frontier, Yin Lao Bei, was once a disciple of the Divine Palace. Moreover, he was the only survivor of that year, and he was close friends with Xiao Yi. However, Master Tian Quan didn't strictly order that once the disciples of the Divine Palace left the sect, they couldn't pass on the teachings they learned to the outside world. Moreover, from the looks of it, he didn't intend to erase the disciples' memories. This was a little different from what Qin Hao had imagined before he joined the meeting. Next, the disciples of the 7 Peaks can learn from each other. You have cultivated for hundreds of years, and today may be the last time you exchange and discuss. Each peak is good at different things. Show what you have learned over the years to your heart's content. Disciples of 2 batches can learn from each other, or you can learn from each other. Remember, don't go too far. Tian Quan said, and sat down with the other 6 Peak Masters. At this moment, the 7 of them seemed to have aged hundreds of years, but their faces were full of satisfaction. Since the establishment of the Divine Palace, there had been countless outstanding people. As the elders of the older generation, they had completed their task and could take off the heavy burden. As for the future of the Divine Palace, it would fall on the preachers of the Eastern Sky. Then it would be Qin Hao and the others. For a time, countless figures walked out of the training hall. The old disciples, the new disciples, and the old disciples of the 2 worlds exchanged martial arts techniques and methods. Since the day they entered the Divine Palace, they had learned different things. But at this moment, they could learn from each other. It was a rare opportunity. In the training hall, rays of brilliance surged, incomparably powerful. It was difficult to see the real body of many of the figures. Only the afterimages collided back and forth, causing a burst of energy shockwaves. All kinds of power of rules and different types of primordial spirits constantly appeared in the training hall. The disciples of the various peaks enjoyed the process of learning from each other. There were even new disciples who joined forces with disciples of the previous batch and began a 4-on-4 collision. There were also people of the Uni Peak who formed a wonderful array, allowing the disciples of the Daozong Peak and the Mizang Palace to join forces to attack. Looking at the gorgeous and colorful battle in the training hall, if it weren't for the dark clouds in Qin Hao's heart, he would have calmed down and enjoyed it carefully. After all, this kind of high-level and high-quality competition was very helpful for improving one's martial arts. Unfortunately, he wasn't in the mood now. Shou Wuk, the successor of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor of the East Continent, Feng Qianli, took a step forward. The sword intent around him was like a sharp sword clanging. His sharp eyes stared at the genius from the Wuk Sword sect. After cultivating in the Divine Palace for more than 3 years, we haven't really fought in a real sense. Why don't we take this opportunity to exchange swordsmanship? First Wuk's eyebrows rose slightly. Feng Qianli was clearly trying to court death with him. A mere half-step sword emperor wanted to compete with him. A true sword emperor? You're not qualified. Shou Wuk didn't have the slightest interest. If he fought with Qin Hao, perhaps his sword would be excited. I know I can't beat you if I go all out, but if I suppress my emperor will and only fight with my sword intent, I'm afraid you can't do anything to me. And if you fight with me, you won't bully me just because you're at a higher cultivation level, right? Feng Qianli said. Since they were at the same cultivation realm, Xiao Chun would only use his sword Dao nomological laws to attack. Even if First Flawless was 1 step ahead and possessed 2 types of laws, Xiao Chun would not fear him. And only in this way could he stand out even more after he won. In this way, Shou Wuk wouldn't have the face to fight for the position of the chief disciple, and the Scorpio Divine Soldier would be Feng Qianli's. Do you really want to be beaten? Shou Wuk stared at Feng Qianli. Then, he took a step forward. The sound of a sword clanging faintly spread, piercing through the air. It's not certain who'll be beaten who. Show me your sword, Feng Qianli said. Suddenly, there was an incomparably dazzling sword light blooming from his body. He waved his hand, and rays of sharp sword qi surrounded his body, swallowing and spitting out cold light. I don't even need to use my sword spirit to fight you. I don't even need rules. Shou Wuk took a step forward. His body soared into the air, and with a wave of his hand, a ray of sword qi pierced out from his palm. This ray of sword qi seemed to have condensed into a solid substance. It fell from the sky with a sharp ray of light, as if ignoring space. It was so fast that it couldn't be seen. Before the sound of the sword could spread, the ray of light had already pierced Feng Qianli's head. You're really arrogant, Feng Qianli said coldly, ignoring the sharp sword that was descending from above his head. After all, Shou Wuk didn't use rules for this sword. He didn't even open the sword Calamity Lotus Soul. He also suppressed the Emperor's will, and it was just the most ordinary ray of sword qi. But did he want to use this to defeat the successor of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor? Was he looking down on Feng Qianli, or was he confident in his own strength? Clang! The sword pierced down from above, but it seemed to be blocked by space. A surge of earth qi gushed out from Feng Qianli's body, shattering Shou Wuk's sword qi. Then, he raised his hand and pointed to the air. Go! Swoosh! 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 The sharp swords around him flashed and turned into a rain of swords. They rushed to the sky and swept toward Shou Wuk. Like his opponent, it was just pure sword qi. Feng Qianli had his own pride. Ha! Shou Wuk smiled. He reached out his hand and grabbed at the void. The space trembled, and endless spirit qi twisted, forming a twisting vortex that swallowed all the sword qi that swept over. Bang! As Shou Wuk clenched his fist, the vortex exploded, and the sword qi inside shattered. Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Don't be affected. Seeing this, Yi Shuihan stepped out and waved at the disciples nearby. He raised his head and winked at Shou Wuk secretly. This way, I won't be afraid of accidentally hurting others. In the air, Showuk smiled faintly. Pretentious. Feng Qianli waved his hand. He raised his hand, and a burst of sword will power surged into the void. It was as if his will had taken over the sky of the training hall. His sword will filled the air. Immediately, a bright sword matrix pattern was born. It spread out in the void and pressed down on Showuk's head. Countless sword lights were born in the sword matrix. They were so dense that they covered the sky like fish scales. They all fell toward Showuk. The sword lights pierced through the space, making sharp noises. Each sword seemed to be Feng Qianli's real body, and it was obvious that they contained his will of the sword. This method of gathering will into a sword matrix was naturally an exquisite method of the Daozong Peak. It was an extraordinary emperor's method, flashy but not practical. Showuk shook his head and said. There seemed to be two flames flickering in the depths of his eyes. A burst of flame will power swept out and filled the void. Suddenly, the temperature rose sharply. It turned into a sea of fire that burned the sky and covered the sky. Feng Qianli was a little surprised. Flames? Since when did Showuk know how to play with fire? Not only him, but many disciples of the Daozong Peak also looked at the fire in the sky. The sea of fire rolled and turned into a curtain of fire that seemed to be able to burn everything. This flame will power was definitely not to be underestimated. It was very powerful. However, this had nothing to do with sword will. There was no shadow of a sword at all. It was more like the will power of a fire elemental soul essence genius. Showuk was a pure sword cultivator. Other than the sword, he didn't seem to have touched anything else. Why did he understand fire now? Chapter 1521. Above the training ground, a huge sword diagram shrouded the sky and the earth, pressing down on Showuk's head. Within the sword diagram, a hazy figure stood tall, like the figure of Feng Qianli, filled with Renhuang's sword will. His sword will was integrated into the sword diagram, resonating with heaven and earth, as if his will could turn into tens of thousands of swords to destroy everything, killing Showuk within. However, Jiuwuk did not release his own sword will to fight against it. Instead, a powerful will of the way of flames swept out. With him as the center, the torrential flames formed a raging sea of fire, blocking the sky and the sword diagram. This scene surprised many of the disciples of Daozong Peak. Showuk cultivated the power of fire? If I remember correctly, this disciple of yours should be a pure swordsman. Migres looked at the two in the air. He had some impressions of the outstanding direct disciples of Daozong Peak. In particular, Showuk and Xiaohan were the most talented disciples of this year. When he joined Daozong Peak, he was a pure swordsman, but in the past 3 years, I am not sure if Wuk has learned other methods. Lord Daozong was also puzzled. Daozong Peak had thousands of methods, including all the martial arts in the world, so it was normal for Showuk to have cultivated other methods. The unique techniques of the Divine Palace were so tempting that even the purest swordsman could not resist the temptation after a long time, gradually becoming impure. Moreover, no one said that Showuk only had one primordial soul. Perhaps there was another primordial soul hidden in his body, and it happened to be of the fire element, so he cultivated fire spells. Everyone was just a little surprised, but they did not think there was anything wrong. Showuk seemed to have sensed something strange below. His expression changed slightly, and it was swept out, suddenly gathering the fire into a sword. In the rolling sea of fire, the tongues of fire all condensed into flame swords. In the blink of an eye, countless flame swords lined up, hanging upside down in the sky, pointing at the huge sword diagram in the void. Go! Showuk raised his hand and shouted. The flame swords broke through the air, stabbing forward in front of the sword diagram, like countless fire dragons soaring in the sky. Slash! Feng Qianli's expression was cold. He activated the sword diagram with his will, and 10,000 swords flew together. Numerous fierce swords slashed down. At the same time, countless flaming swords rose into the sky and collided violently. Waves of shattering sounds exploded out, and it was too much for the eyes to take in. If I don't use the rules and can't expose my source soul, it will be a little troublesome to suppress Feng Qianli. Shouwuk saw that although his flaming sword was fierce, its sharpness was somewhat inferior to Feng Qianli's. In the blink of an eye, the sword diagram pressed down on the sea of fire, showing signs of crushing and piercing through the sea of fire. This was not because he was weak, but because Shouwuk's sword essence was not as good as Feng Qianli's. He had lost because his understanding of the sword Dao was too shallow. Of course, if the real Shouwuk was here, this would never happen. Unfortunately, he was an imposter. Your sword Dao is only SOSO. Feng Qianli stood in the dojo and activated the sword diagram with his will, constantly pressing down on the sea of fire. Many sword auras fell into the sea of fire, piercing through and tearing it apart, weakening Shouwuk's flame will. If this continued, Shouwuk's flames would not be able to hold on for long and would be broken by the sword diagram. When Feng Qianli suppressed his realm and did not use the Emperor's will, he was indeed no match for him. A trace of excitement appeared in Feng Qianli's heart. Senior Brother Wuk's sword will is being suppressed. Many disciples of Daozong Peak were surprised. When it came to sword Dao, Shouwuk had always been ranked first in their hearts. Xintian Peak's 10,000 swords Empyrean Peak was so shocking that every one of them could be called an unparalleled sword. Even Feng Qianli, who came from a Zhuiying sword palace in the East State, was still inferior to Shouwuk in terms of talent in sword Dao. Why was he being suppressed today? Boom! While the disciples were puzzled, a loud sound came from the void. The sea of flames was swallowed up by the 10,000 swords and completely shattered. The flames dissipated, leaving only the sharp sword light that pierced through and continued to fall toward Shouwuk. Admit defeat, and I'll leave you with some dignity, Feng Qianli said. At this moment, his confidence was growing. His sword was too strong. He was already 100% confident that he could defeat Shouwuk. Let's talk about it later if I can save my dignity. Shouwuk's body technique flashed wildly, ethereal and ghostly. He weaved through the 10,000 swords. Although he was locked on by his opponent's will, he could not be hit. This extremely elegant body technique lit up the eyes of many Daozong Peak disciples. They were amazed. Not only is Senior Brother Wuk's sword unparalleled, even his fire control technique and body technique are so perfect. It's really amazing. Senior Brother Wuk said that he won't use the rules. Could it be that he's afraid that the rule sword will be too strong and Senior Brother Qianli might not be able to withstand a single strike? Is that why he deliberately used other martial arts to practice? The disciples of Daozong Peak looked at each other and nodded. That was very likely. After all, according to the momentum of the 10,000 swords Empyrean, Feng Qianli might not even be able to withstand a single strand of the rule sword will. The power was really too strong. What nonsense are you talking about? Feng Qianli's sharp eyes swept across the people who spoke. He was the dignified successor of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor. Could it be that he could not even withstand a single strike from someone else? Could it be that Shouwuk also had the same thought in his heart, so he did not use the rules of the sword? This was really too humiliating. Hurricane break. With a roar, the sword will on Feng Qianli's body surged even more violently. Countless sword lights spewed out and rushed into the void above. They reflected each other's brilliance and intertwined into a sword net to surround him. He wanted to see if Shouwuk's ghostly footwork could really dodge it. It's time to get serious. Shouwuk looked at the sword chi that was coming for him. It was simply airtight. He could not dodge it and could only face it head-on. However, he was not very good at sword Dao. He was good at alchemy. Red Lotus, forget it. I can't use my Yuan spirit. Qin Hao, who was disguised as Shouwuk, was helpless. Once he released his Yuan spirit, his true identity would be exposed. Now is not the time to do so. He had to try his best to stall for time. However, if he lost, he was afraid that he would lose face as the successor of the Southern Region's Sword Emperor. 9 Palace War Emperor art. Open for me. Qin Hao clenched his right fist, and a dazzling golden light burst out from his body. Visible to the naked eye, the meridians on his body lit up. It was as if golden lines were gathering in the palm of his hand. Those meridians contained an extremely violent power. Bang, 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 bang. Golden light constantly penetrated the palaces of his feet, knees, waist, heart, and shoulders. It was as if a gate of primitive power had been opened. Waves of domineering power flowed through his body and finally gathered in his fist. When the right fist palace was opened, Qin Hao's physical strength had reached an extremely terrifying level even without using the power of the dragon soul. Then he raised his fist and punched downwards. The fist radiance rushed towards the sword Qi Hurricane. The dazzling golden light formed a heavenly fist force that smashed into the sword Qi Hurricane like a mountain. Boom! The sword Qi was shattered and the hurricane was scattered by the fist. At this moment, Feng Qianli, who was in the training hall, seemed to have been hit in the chest by a hammer. He took 2 steps back and blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. There was a look of disbelief in his eyes. There was no sword intent, only fist force. Showuk suppressed his realm and did not even use the rules. Yet, he was able to shatter his sword Qi Hurricane. Even his physical strength was so terrifying. Mizar Hall's Emperor Art. Daozong looked at Mizar War Reverend. How could there be such a good thing? He was secretly teaching his disciple a top Emperor Art. Why are you looking at me? I don't know anything. Mizar War Reverend was puzzled. When did Showuk learn to fight with Dilly? Other than the personal disciples of his peak and Qin Hao, no one from the other 5 peaks should know. Who taught him? It is said that before Qin Hao and Showuk came to the Divine Palace, they accidentally learned the 9-Palace War Emperor Art in the Dilua Bay ruins. Not only them, but Zhou Wudao and Zheng Qingqi also know it. My peak, Caiwa, also knows it. The Xiantian deity lord said. She knew it from Tian, Quebec. When Qin Hao learned to cast weapons at Xiantian Peak, he used the battle with Dilly. No wonder. Mizar War Reverend snorted. Zhou Wudao and Zheng Qingqi knew it too. They must have communicated with Showuk in private. After all, they were all disciples of Daozong Peak. However, thinking about it made him angry. This was the Mizar Hall's ultimate art. Now, all the 7 peaks knew it, and it was a common technique. He did not know which ancestor left it in the ruins. It was a misfortune. Your physical body is so ferocious. Feng Qianli looked up. Showuk was wrapped in the golden light of the Great Path. It gave him a lot of pressure. I'm stronger in other areas. Do you want to try? Qin Hao shouted. He reached out his palm and swallowed the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. He gathered primordial fire with the power of the War Emperor and blasted out a huge flaming sword qi. Sword qi surged like a giant flaming sword smashing down, slashing into the dojo, burying Feng Qianli's entire body. However, this sword did not have any power. As the flames spread, the ground of the training ground was not damaged at all. Feng Qianli was also unharmed. However, he stood still like a statue. He stood there without moving. His empty eyes were wide open. It was as if his consciousness had been pulled away and entered another space. Sword Realm Field. Migres cried out in surprise. Showuk used the way of the Sword Realm to trap Feng Qianli's consciousness. If the Sword Realm was not broken, Feng Qianli would not be able to escape. However, at the same time, Showuk was also trapped in the Sword Realm. This was a trick of the Saint level. As one's cultivation deepened, the spiritual energy of the martial artist would reach a certain level. It would be very difficult to use this way to trap the consciousness of others. Moreover, there was a danger of damaging one's soul. However, no one expected that Showuk would commit such a big taboo and play such a small trick. However, Tian Quan did not know that Qin Hao was also forced to do this because he was not the real Showuk. Just as the peak venerables and disciples were discussing, Feng Qianli was facing his doom in the realm. Blazing Fire Sword Realm. Feng Qianli looked around. There was no training ground or any figure. There was only endless fire. This was a flame realm formed by a martial artist's spiritual energy. Opposite him, Showuk was walking towards him step by step. There was still no trace of sword intent. His entire body was burning with fire. He had completely turned into a body of flames. "Ha! You're playing Realm Field with me." Feng Qianli did not notice anything unusual. He just wanted to laugh. This was a child's trick, a trick that saint-level martial artists often used. When one's cultivation reached the emperor level, he could break it with a thought. Had Showuk, who was known to be unparalleled in the way of the sword, been forced to such a state by his superb swordsmanship? "Keep laughing. You'll cry soon," Qin Hao said coldly. He was extremely calm in his own realm field. After all, as long as the realm field was not broken, no matter what happened here, the outside world would not know. Chapter 1522. Endless raging flames burned. In the space, heavenly fire occasionally fell from the void. Countless rivers of magma flowed on the ground, crisscrossing. The ground cracked open, and flames rolled up from the ravines. The world was crimson, like a purgatory of flames. Even so, there was no fear on Feng Qianli's face. His gaze was sharp to the extreme, not to mention suppressing his cultivation level. Even if Head Wu Kei unleashed his full cultivation and condensed his emperor will into a sword domain, Feng Qianli wouldn't be trapped here. After all, he had also touched the threshold of the emperor realm, half-step sword emperor. Qin Hao walked over step by step. On his body, the color of the flames became darker and thicker, like burning sticky blood. The whole world began to turn red, and the scene became even more terrifying. It was as if they had fallen into a demon's den. Feng Qianli's heart skipped a beat. He felt that something was wrong. The pressure from the opposite side was getting stronger. Although the artistic conception space was formed by the will of a martial artist, it was still a martial artist's power. The aura in this space was like that of a demon god. It was completely different from Showuk's temperament. It was like another person. It was strange, but also faintly familiar. "Kill." Feng Qianli moved. He did not have time to think. His palm formed a sword seal, and the sword aura around his body whistled. A turbulent sword light slashed forward. "You want to compete with swords? I'll satisfy you." Red Lotus exploding flame blade. Qin Hao let go of his hands and feet. The origin spirit in his body shook, and the powerful Red Lotus overlord fire spewed out, condensing into a giant flaming sword. The demonic flames on the sword surged and slashed forward, cutting open the space. The blood-red demonic flames raged, and the violent power was completely different from the outside world. After all, Qin Hao could not use his soul power in front of so many people. But now, he could use it to his heart's content. Boom! The sword aura shattered, and Feng Qianli was sent flying. A heat wave hit his body, and the terrible burning power soaked his body, making him groan. At this moment, an incomparably bright light burst out. He turned his body with the sword aura and forcefully dispersed the Red Lotus overlord fire chi. His expression changed wildly. "You are not Showuk." Such a terrifying flame was able to destroy his half-step sword emperor's sword chi with just a wisp of soul power. Not many people in the Divine Palace could do this. The blood-colored devil flame was especially eye-catching. In all of the 7 peaks, there was only one person who possessed such a strange flame. Migres Palace's Qin Hao. "You still recognized me, but it doesn't matter. Wuk has other things to do. I'll fight you on his behalf." Qin Hao chuckled. The Red Lotus fire was too prominent. Once he made a move, he would definitely be recognized. "Are you crazy? I have never thought of fighting you. My opponent is Showuk." Feng Qianli roared. He did not know why Qin Hao was pretending to be Showuk. However, there was one thing that he was absolutely no match for Qin Hao. This person could be said to be invincible in the same realm. It's all the same, all the same. Come on, come on. Qin Hao did not care about anything else. With his hands behind his back, he stepped into the void and stepped on Feng Qianli's head. With this step, the void trembled as if it could shatter the great path of heaven and earth. It was a high-level emperor-level martial technique, the water, wind, godly steps. When one's cultivation was low, this step was not offensive and could only be used to avoid danger. After reaching a certain level, one could use the power of the step to combine with one's own martial technique to achieve extraordinary results. Once one reached the emperor level and used the godly steps, the earth-shattering power of the step could crush the heavens and shatter a martial artist's soul. Whether it was fighting or escaping, the power was extremely strong. Qin Hao's step landed, and the void rumbled. The bottom of his foot contained an extremely strong power of the great path that suppressed downward. It was like a demonic mountain was pressing down on Feng Qianli's head. Feng Qianli's eyes widened as he felt the huge power coming from above his head. Even his soul was trembling. He put his hands together and stabbed upward. A 3-meter-long sword light shot out from his palms and collided with the suppressing power. Suddenly, a muffled sound was heard, and the sword light was crushed. Feng Qianli felt the blood in his abdomen churning. He wanted to spit out a mouthful of blood as his body fell rapidly. This power was too strong. Dong! Qin Hao took another step, ignoring the distance between them. After all, this world was formed by his will. His will caused the step to land on top of Feng Qianli's head. This step pierced through the void and shattered the sky. It was so loud that Feng Qianli's eardrums were about to burst. He could no longer hold back the blood in his mouth. He opened his mouth and spat it forward. His body felt like it was being crushed, and his aura fluctuated greatly. Qin Hao, stop. I don't want to fight with you. You don't want to be the chief disciple of Daozong Peak anymore? What does it have to do with you? Of course it has to do with me. If you can't get past me, you won't be the chief disciple of Daozong Peak anymore. Don't be too arrogant. Your artistic conception can't trap me. If I expose it, you won't have it easy either, Feng Qianli roared. He didn't know why Qin Hao pretended to be Shou Wuck, but there must be a big secret. However, the battle of the chief disciple of Daozong Peak had nothing to do with Migre's palace. If Qin Hao's identity was exposed, how would he explain it to old man Daozong? Can't trap you. Qin Hao sneered. Try it. You're going too far. Feng Qianli raised his head and roared. On his body, a bright light was released. A great Dao Rule sword intent flowed, and sword qi flashed continuously. It was sharp and dazzling, as if it could break open the sky. Waves of terrifying sword light were formed and integrated with Feng Qianli's rule power. He didn't believe that he couldn't break Qin Hao's artistic conception. After all, in a situation where they were at the same level, the difference in their soul power wasn't big. As long as one's will was firm, he wouldn't be trapped in his opponent's artistic conception and be unable to escape. With his half-step sword sovereign-level rule power, even Shou Wuck, who had stepped into the martial emperor level, couldn't trap him in his artistic conception, let alone Qin Hao, who had yet to step into the martial emperor level. One sword light chilling 3,000 miles. Feng Qianli roared. His long hair danced in the wind. An endless sword qi rushed towards the sky from his position. Just one sword qi was enough to pierce through space. When the space collapsed, he would report to the peak venerables that Qin Hao dared to impersonate Shou Wuck and played with him. He would definitely be punished by the peak venerables. He would make Qin Hao kneel and beg for mercy. He would make Qin Hao too ashamed to face the people of the Seven Peaks. It's good to be young. Qin Hao looked at the struggling Feng Qianli. The ignorant were truly fearless. How could his raging flames' intent be broken by a half-step sword sovereign so easily? That's right. The difference in their levels wasn't big. Even if he was weaker than the other party, as long as his will was firm enough, he wouldn't be unable to break free from his consciousness. Unfortunately, the difference in their soul power was too big. Dong! As the fleet footsteps stomped down, the heaven and earth shook. The power that spread out in the void shattered countless sword qi. Even if there were a few sword qi that flew towards the sky, it didn't cause any ripples in the blood-red void. How can this be? Feng Qianli's eyes widened in shock. He actually couldn't shake this space? He was a half-step sword sovereign and had comprehended the laws. Not to mention that he was in the same realm as Qin Hao. Even if a true arch used a consciousness seal, it wouldn't be able to cause any ripples. How tyrannical was Qin Hao's will? How powerful was his soul? Do you understand now? Qin Hao looked down with pity. Although Feng Qianli was a little disgusting, he was still a force to be reckoned with in this turbulent undercurrent. It was time to let him understand everything. But before that, it was better to beat him up. In the Uni Peaks dojo, countless gazes were on the two people in the dojo. Shou Wuck and Feng Qianli were both sword geniuses. Now, they were engaged in a battle of intent to compete for the position of the chief disciple of Daozong Peak. For the sake of fairness, if Shou Wuck didn't use his emperor's intent and didn't use the laws, who would win in the end? Time passed by slowly. Shou Wuck stood with his eyes closed. His long hair fluttered gently, and from time to time, his body would tremble with flames. However, his aura was stable. It was obvious that he was in a relaxed state. Feng Qianli was different. His face was distorted, and some of his expressions were very exaggerated, giving off an indecent feeling. And as time passed, his aura became more and more restless. At first, his sword intent was still very strong, but gradually, his aura began to weaken rapidly. Fist marks appeared on his face one after another, and his hair also started to burn under an inexplicable force. Boom! Finally, an explosion sounded. Feng Qianli's standing posture was as if he was hit by a wild beast. He flew backward fiercely, and his clothes burst open on the spot. His body bent into the shape of a bow and fell to the edge of the dojo, knocking out a disciple who couldn't dodge in time. A mouthful of blood sprayed on the ground. The successor of the East Continent's Zhuiying Sword Emperor no longer had the noble appearance of a sword cultivator. At this moment, his face was extremely pale, and his eyes finally opened, revealing sadness. You let me win. Qin Hao, who was pretending to be Shou Wuck, cupped his fists and chuckled. At this moment, in the depths of Feng Qianli's desolate eyes, there was great fear spreading. His feelings were incomparably complicated. There was both shame and anger, and also a bellyful of anger. If Qin Hao hadn't told him the truth, he absolutely wouldn't have been able to endure this. However, in the face of unknown danger, the successor of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor finally chose to put aside his personal grievances. He reacted quickly enough and got up. He cupped his fists and sighed. I admit defeat. Shou Wuck deserves to be the real #1 swordsman. I withdraw from the position of the chief disciple of the Daozong Peak. Chief disciple? Feng Qianli didn't care about the chief disciple anymore. He just wanted to leave alive. Although he had been beaten up miserably by Qin Hao in the state, he had only lost to Qin Hao and not to the Southern Domain's first disciple, Wu Quebec. Thus, he did not feel that there was anything embarrassing about it. His sword was still very strong. He lost so quickly. Look at the injury on senior brother Qianli's face. There isn't a trace of sword intent. It looks more like a punch. Senior brother Wuck really kept his promise. I really want to enter the state of mind and see senior brother Wuck's fist technique. Many disciples of the Daozong Peak said with admiration. Shou Wuck was not only unparalleled in the way of the sword, but also in the way of the Tao of Flames, his movement techniques, and even his fists. The disciples of the Daozong Peak used to think that he was cold and arrogant. Now, it seemed that he was just keeping a low profile. Hearing the discussions around him, Feng Qianli was driven mad. How was it Shou Wuck? It was clearly Qin Hao, that bastard, who beat him up. He had punched him thousands of times. It's precious to know your own limits. Since that's the case, which disciple of my peak wants to exchange a few moves with Wuck? Daozong looked down and felt very gratified. He also wanted Shou Wuck and Xiao Han to inherit the position of chief disciple and second chief disciple of the Daozong Peak. Everyone, please advise me. Qin Hao imitated Shou Wuck's usual movements. His eyes scanned the surroundings without the slightest ripple, giving off an aloof feeling. Chapter 1523. The disciples of Daozong Peak looked at each other, but no one was willing to step forward. Feng Qianli was a disciple of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor of the East Continent, and his swordsmanship was extremely strong. After coming to the Divine Palace, he became a direct disciple and was personally taught by the Peak Master. His cultivation had reached the level of a half-step sword emperor, and he had mastered the rules of swordsmanship. There were only a few people on Daozong Peak who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him, and there were only one or two who were better than him. It just so happened that Shouwuk was better than Feng Qianli. Now that Feng Qianli had been defeated, no one dared to step forward. "We are convinced," the disciples replied. Lord Daozong nodded. "From today onwards, Wuk will be one of the peak seats of our peak. He will inherit the spirit of the peak and be a role model for all disciples. His will is my will." There was still a huge difference between a chief disciple and a direct disciple. It was equivalent to the chief disciple of a sect's cabinet in the outside world. They were the successors of the sect leader, and they represented the absolute will of the sect. There were 2 peak seats, and Shouwuk only took one. As for whether he would be the chief disciple or the chief disciple, it was an internal matter of Daozong Peak. After returning to the peak, it would be judged by Lord Daozong and the elders. Qin Hao walked to the side of the platform with an indifferent expression and stood beside the former chief disciple, Shenghua. From now on, he was a symbol of Daozong Peak and a role model for all disciples. He looked across and made eye contact with Qin Hao beside Eastern Sky. The corners of their lips curled up in tacit understanding. Although their temperaments were different, no one could imagine that they were the same person. Feng Qianli glanced at Qin Hao. Although he knew that Shouwuk was in disguise, he still felt uncomfortable standing next to Shenghua. The 2 most outstanding people of the 2 peaks were standing side by side, and they were being looked at with respect by all the disciples. If this was not an illusion, he would never give up that position. "Xiao Han of Daozong Peak, please enlighten me." At this moment, Xiao Han stepped out and faced the people in the training hall. Her body was surrounded by platinum flames, and a dazzling crown appeared on her head. The aura of a holy and inviolable empress spread out, majestic and awe-inspiring. It was as if she was an empress leading an army into battle. She was so valiant that no one dared to look at her directly. The disciples of Daozong Peak instinctively retreated. Even a Runhuang would find it difficult to withstand the pressure of this imperial aura. "Please enlighten me," Xiao Han shouted again. His emperor's chi swept out, and his heroic spirit was overbearing. It actually caused the vast training ground to become silent, and no one dared to challenge him. "Senior sister, Xiao Han's talent is unparalleled. We are all sincerely convinced," the disciples of Daozong Peak said in unison. Xiao Han's cultivation was no weaker than Shouwuk's at all. In fact, he might even be stronger. Not to mention her source spirit. Just her emperor realm was enough to make people not dare to fight her. "Little girl, ha!" On the platform, Migres laughed and looked at Daozong. "A little girl has scared all the disciples of your peak away. Is there no one else in your sect?" Yi Shuihan, Zhou Wudao, Qian Ning, Zheng Qingqi. Daozong called out some names. It was just a spar. If they lost, they lost. They did not have the courage to fight. In the training hall, Yi Shuihan, Fairy Qian Ning, Zheng Qingqi, and the others were all silent. It was obvious that they did not intend to compete with Xiao Han. Even Zhou Wudao, who was usually arrogant and domineering, stood in place and laughed foolishly. Xiao Han has stepped into the Emperor realm, and her realm is already ahead of everyone else. In particular, her spiritual control of her source spirit is very strong. I'm afraid no one will compete with her, Yaowang Fairy said. The other peak venerables nodded. There were only a few outstanding disciples in each peak. With Xiao Han's ability, even among the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, there were not many direct disciples who could defeat her. Daozong Peak's Shouwuk had the strength to fight her. The rest were Migres Palace's Qin Hao, Yaowang Peak's Qingji Han, and Uni Peak's Ning Tianqing. However, within Daozong Peak, Shouwuk had already obtained the qualification to take a peak seat. Even if the others competed, they would not be Xiao Han's match. Xiao Han has been promoted to the peak seat. Daozong shouted, "Thank you for letting me win." Xiao Han turned and walked to Shouwuk's side. She had won without a fight. In Yaguang Peak's team, Qingji Han's pupils contracted slightly. Her gaze fell on Xiao Han. She had won without a fight and stepped onto the peak seat. Unfortunately, she was not from Daozong Peak. Otherwise, Xiao Han would not be so relaxed. Dong! A figure stepped out from Uni Peak's team. As his footsteps landed, a layer of majestic Emperor Qi shook the soles of his feet. It was as if he was born with the Emperor Qi, suppressing all things and making heaven and earth submit to him. This was Ning Tianqing. Uni Peak can only have one peak seat. Come at me together. Ning Tianqing stared at all the Uni Peak disciples opposite her. She was going to fight against the entire peak with her own strength. Her tone could not be described as not arrogant. Even though Uni Peak's disciples were much fewer than the other peaks, there were still about 30 of them. To be able to persist from the beginning to the end and step onto the divine palace, which one of them was not outstanding. And Ning Tianqing was undoubtedly looking down on them by asking all of them to attack together. How arrogant, a disciple of Mizang Peak said. Shut up, it's not like we're fighting him. Although he's arrogant, Ning Tianqing is indeed an extraordinary person. The disciples of the other 5 peaks looked at the battle. At this moment, the training hall had clearly entered into a fierce competition for the chief disciple of each peak. The individual battles were silently paused. Almost everyone was looking at the Uni Peak disciples. They were openly challenged by one person, so they must not feel good. What's more, Ning Tianqing's words were also incomparably domineering. Only one peak seat could exist in the entire Uni Peak. Was he referring to himself? Dong! A Uni Peak disciple stepped out. Dong! The second. Dong! The third. The fourth. One figure after another stepped out, forming an indestructible formation. Obviously, this group of disciples could not stand Ning Tianqing's behavior and were preparing to join forces to resist. No matter how talented you are, you should not look down on us like this. It's really infuriating. Please enlighten us. A Uni Peak disciple with an outstanding temperament stood in front of the formation. A writing brush appeared in his hand, and he quickly drew in the void. Huge beasts, terrifying birds, and giants were constantly outlined by this disciple's brush. They were vivid and lifelike, as if they were made of flesh and blood. The vast and boundless team was like a majestic army, bombarding Ning Tianqing. At the same time, all the Uni Peak disciples released their essence souls and formed a soul power formation. The power of the formation continuously gathered on the person at the front, enhancing his ability. None of them had entered the Emperor realm, and none of them had even comprehended the laws in the half-step Emperor realm. They knew very well how terrifying an Emperor realm powerhouse was. Even so, they would not allow others to belittle them. The army trampled on the training hall as if they were trampling on the heavens. They surged towards Ning Tianqing and engulfed him. Ning Tianqing did not say a word. Perhaps he was disdainful of them. He sat on the ground, facing the vast army. His Guqin spirit condensed, and his hands fell between the strings. His entire temperament changed drastically, becoming as noble as an emperor. Hum! A powerful Guqin sound swept forward, breaking through the sky, rolling and spreading. It was like a large net of sound waves falling from the sky, suppressing everything in the training hall as it fell towards the head of the vast army. Musical formation. Mo Xian's dark eyes shot out a ray of light, as if piercing into Ning Tianqing's technique. He was also a Guqin cultivator, and his musical techniques were extraordinary. Naturally, he could see a thing or two from the other party's Guqin intent. In all honesty, this person's Guqin technique was extremely strong. It was just a strand of music, but Ning Tianqing seemed to dominate the great Tao of the heavens. At this moment, Mo Xian realized that there was a gap between his Guqin technique and Ning Tianqing's. What's more, the other party's music could form a formation with his own intent. There were probably not many people in the world with such ability. Chang'e Lo was also listening with his eyes closed. It was as if his soul was pouncing on Ning Tianqing's strings, becoming one with the Guqin. Even though it was just a sound wave vibration, He could completely feel the power of the other parties while contained in the music. Just as Mo Sien had admitted, the other party was extremely strong. I thought that I was the best in music in the southern region, but I didn't realize that the successor of the Ning family's third branch is even better than me. Changhe Lo closed his eyes and smiled inwardly. No emotion could be heard from his voice. Ning Tianxing had hidden himself well, living in seclusion deep in the mountains and forests of the Great Ding Duchy. He had never had any achievements that attracted the attention of the world. However, when he made a move, it was so shocking. If it had been in the past, Changhe Lo might have been jealous and ignited with jealousy, igniting the desire to compete. But now, seeing someone more outstanding than him again, he was surprisingly calm. This was probably Shou Wu's state of mind when he saw Qin Hao at the Golden Light City auction house. Was it so difficult to admit that someone was better than him? In the past, Changhe Lo thought that it was very difficult. He couldn't tolerate someone more outstanding. He wanted to be the strongest and reach the peak. But now, he had learned to appreciate. Yao Guang had taught him to appreciate. Perhaps appreciation itself was a kind of cultivation. Buzz. A layer of platinum light surrounded Changhe Lo's body. As Ning Tianxing's Guqin music spread, a kind of law condensed within his will and integrated into his spirit. Controlling the laws, half-step Yuan Emperor. Changhe Lo had broken through the limits of the Emperor realm. On the other side, Ning Tianxing's Guqin music continued to spread, each wave more turbulent than the last. Finally, under the bombardment of his musical array, the array formed by all the disciples of the Uni Peak shattered with a loud bang. The array was forcibly destroyed, and countless bodies were sent flying diagonally by the sound of the Guqin and fell to the edge of the training hall. He had single-handedly defeated an entire peak. With a wave of his hand, Ning Tianxing's Guqin spirit disappeared. He stood up and glanced at his fellow disciples who had fallen to the ground. He didn't say a word, turned around, and walked toward the platform, standing among the chief disciples. At this time, silence spoke louder than words. Damn it! A disciple of the Uni Peak who had fallen to the ground slammed his fist on the ground, his eyes filled with anger. His musical array is too strong. He didn't even release his emperor intent and laws, but we couldn't hold on. Although I don't want to admit it, I have to admit that he's on a different level from us. Another injured disciple of the Uni Peak sighed. What was a genius? It was only relative. In the outside world, each of them had crushed many of their peers. But in the Divine Palace, there were stronger people who could easily sweep them away. I'm the chief disciple of my peak, Ning Tianxing. On the platform, perfected Lord Uni laughed loudly. Ning Tianxing's style was a little cold, but his talent was impeccable. It was normal that he was a little arrogant. Congratulations, junior apprentice Brother Ning. The previous chief disciple of the Daozong Peak, a middle-aged Taoist, congratulated him. Ning Tianxing didn't look at the Taoist. His gaze moved and fell on Qin Hao, who was beside Eastern Sky. His expression was as calm as ever, as if he was looking at the disciples he had defeated. The chief disciple of the Migres Hall? Now, he was also the chief disciple of the Uni Peak. Chapter 1524. What do you think he's thinking? On the right side of the platform, Qin Hao, who was pretending to be Shou Wu, secretly sent a message to Xiao Han. He was now standing right across from Ning Tianxing, who was on the left side of the platform. He could clearly see Ning Tianxing's expression. Org, who cares what he's thinking? Xiao Han raised her eyes and looked forward. Crown Prince Ning Wu's calm expression contained a strong sense of challenge. He had the urge to fight Qin Hao. Xiao Han didn't care about these things. She was more curious about what method Qin Hao had used to split himself into two. The doppelganger had become the flawless head. She knew that the Qin Hao beside her was the real body. As for the one beside Eastern Sky, she did not understand much, but it was definitely not a simple doppelganger technique. That body was full of energy and had vivid features. It was no different from a real person. The Sixth Nirvana stage, Peak Venerables, did not notice it at all. Besides, she was more worried about how to leave this place safely with Qin Hao. Brother Qin Hao, I'm a little scared. Xiao Han reached out her hand. She realized that Qin Hao was maintaining the appearance of Shou Wuk and withdrew her hand. Don't worry. Trust in Wuk's ability. Qin Hao replied secretly, but he was not confident in his heart. He could split into two and become two living beings. Naturally, he could not do without the help of the dragon spirit Dharma power. However, the Dharma power could not be maintained for long. It depended on how fast Shou Wuk could move and whether he could complete the task Qin Hao had entrusted to him before the Dharma power disappeared. If the Dharma power was accidentally exposed during this period, he could only sigh and sigh. Man proposes, God disposes. Qin Hao was worried. His thoughts were all on Shou Wuk. His success or failure would affect everyone's life and death. In the training hall, the battle for the chief disciple of each peak was still going on fiercely. The two candidates for Daozong Peak were confirmed. They were Shou Wuk and Xiao Han. Ning Tianxing swept away all the disciples of the Uni Peak and became the only peak seat. As for the Migres Palace, Qin Hao did not need to compete with others, so he summoned the Dharma idol to confuse the crowd. After all, the Dharma idol did not need to fight fiercely with others, so its spiritual energy would not be consumed as quickly and could be maintained for a longer time. Next, there were only the Alchemy, Supreme Micro, Black Heaven, and Mizar peaks left. www.org. After Ning Tianxing won, the first princess of the East Continent, Qingji Han, stepped out from the direction of the Yaowang Peak. She stood in the center of the training ground and stared coldly at the entire Yaowang Peak team. She said, "Go ahead." In an instant, the training hall fell silent. The hearts of the disciples of the 7 peaks trembled slightly. There was no limit to the number of challengers and no rejection. Did Qingji Han also want to challenge a peak? But the Yaowang Peak was not the Uni Peak. They had many disciples. In the Divine Palace, besides the Daozong Peak, the Yaowang Peak and Mizar Peak had the most disciples. They had many geniuses and 3 or 4 direct disciples. Qingji Han was worthy of being the successor of Empress Lingxian of the East Continent. She was really ambitious, but it was not difficult to see that she was very confident in herself. In an instant, all eyes were focused on the Yaowang Peak team. In the face of Qingji Han's challenge, hundreds of Yaowang Peak disciples did not know who would have the courage to accept. At the front of the team, Mo Xian did not move. As a prince of an empire under Da Qin, he naturally would not compete with Qingji Han for the position of chief disciple. Gooden, whose soul had taken over Su Jin's body, also did not move. He stood there with a wooden face. Even though he had awakened the power of 2 souls and his cultivation had increased greatly, he did not intend to make a move. In the silent dojo, all the disciples of the Yaowang Peak were unusually quiet. No one dared to move forward. They were completely intimidated by the aura of the first princess of the East Continent. Several peak masters looked at each other and smiled. Another female emperor. Previously, Xiao Han had suppressed the disciples of the Daozong Peak and made them not dare to make a move. Qingji Han was the same. It seemed that the 2 most outstanding girls were intentionally competing with each other. Even so, no one in the Yaowang Peak would fight with Qingji Han. After all, her cultivation and powerful talent were obvious. Changhe Lo of the Southern Mountain Range. Please enlighten me. Suddenly, in the quiet team, a white figure stepped forward and walked in front of Qingji Han. This person had a head of white hair and was extremely handsome. His handsome appearance was rare in the world. It was Changhe Lo, who was imprisoned on the Dustfall platform. He dares. A Yaowang Peak disciple looked extremely shocked. Qingji Han was very strong. In the past 3 years, no one in their peak could withstand the power of her murderous eyes. Everyone was scared by her. www. Changhe Lo's talent was also very outstanding. He had defeated countless Yaowang Peak geniuses. Even when Su Jin and Lan Qingwu joined forces, they still couldn't gain an advantage. However, compared to Qingji Han, there was still a gap between them. In the hearts of everyone, Qingji Han was like a demoness who killed without batting an eyelid. She was invincible and became a dark shadow in everyone's heart. Changhe Lo dared to challenge her at this time and provoke her. Mo Xian's gaze was fixed forward. When Changhe Lo defeated the disciples of the Uni Peak, he sensed that Changhe Lo seemed to have been enlightened. In the artistic conception of the zither music, his cultivation had increased by a large level. There were faint rules and Tao intent circulating in his body. Even so, it was simply wishful thinking to want to defeat Qingji Han. Half-step Yuan Emperor and a true emperor were on two different levels. In the continent, there had been half-step Yuan emperors who had defeated true emperors. That was because the half-step Yuan emperors were so talented that their rules and Tao intent could crush their opponents. Changhe Lo's talent was not bad. Unfortunately, he met Qingji Han, whose talent was on a higher level. This battle was a contest without any suspense. It's a little unexpected. On the platform, perfected Lord Tian Quan spoke slowly. Changhe Lo didn't give him a very good impression. It wasn't because he had plotted against Qin Hao, but because of his bad character. Even though he wasn't a disciple of Tian Quan, as an ultimate nirvana powerhouse, he could clearly see through Changhe Lo's Tao heart. However, at this moment, Changhe Lo, who was standing in the middle of the platform, seemed to be different from before. I'm also very surprised. Yao Guang revealed a smile. It seemed that there was a slight change in his state of mind. In the past, he wouldn't have dared to directly face Qingji Han and do something that was impossible. In the past, Changhe Lo would always consider all aspects before acting. He would only make a sudden move when he was 100% confident. Now, he should also know that he was no match for Qingji Han, but he still stood up. You've reached the half-step emperor level. Qingji Han's cold and elegant gaze was extremely sharp, as if it could pierce through Changhe Lo's soul. I just had a breakthrough. Changhe Lo said truthfully. I admire your courage. Qingji Han shifted her gaze and looked at Mo Xian, who was behind Changhe Lo. Even Mo Xian didn't have the guts to fight with her. It had nothing to do with her status, but Mo Xian knew very well how powerful Qingji Han was. However, Changhe Lo actually dared to challenge her in the next second after controlling the rules. You are a beast tamer, and you are good at controlling music. But you should know that Master taught me the art of meditation. All music is useless against me. Qingji Han said, the art of meditation could kill one's inner demons, purify one's mind, and resist all music in the world. Changhe Lo's strongest skill was controlling the music. However, his strongest skill was completely countered by Qingji Han. I know. Besides, you are a true emperor. I am at best a fake emperor. My realm is completely suppressed. Changhe Lo said calmly. Even so, you still want to fight? Qingji Han asked. Please. Changhe Lo sat on the ground. His snow-white hair fluttered in the primordial qi. His Guqin spirit appeared in front of him. His outstanding appearance merged with his clear heart. His temperament was even better than before. It was as if, at this moment, he had found his original heart and was back to his true self. Qingji Han's expression was extremely unhappy. She said coldly, I didn't use the will of the emperor or the art of meditation. It is absolutely fair, but you stood out to fight with me. You should have a certain level of mental awareness. When Xiao Han was fighting for first place, no one from Daozong Peak dared to challenge her. Han Qingji felt that she should also have this kind of weight. But who would have thought that Changhe Lo would stand out and ruin her plan? She was very angry. Clang! What responded to Han Qingji with a rapid sound that resembled a burst of sword qi. Changhe Lo's slender fingers swept out, causing the zither strings beneath his palms to vibrate. A blazing white blade flew out, transforming into a rain of swords that shot forward. Back off! Qingji Han roared. A burst of emperor qi erupted. It was as if she had transformed into the first iron-blooded female emperor of the East Continent. The surging primordial qi swept out. It was dazzling and shrouded the entire void of the Taoist hall. It tore and swallowed the rain of swords and blasted forward. It swept past Changhe Lo, who was sitting on the ground. Buzz! Like the impact of a huge wave, Changhe Lo's body leaned back slightly. His chest felt stuffy. The roar shook his qi and blood. His meridians felt as if they were about to explode. A warm current surged into his throat. He couldn't help but spit on the strings. Sovereign's descent. Changhe Lo swallowed back the saliva. His face was flushed. His snow-white hair fluttered in the wind. Blue veins flashed on his face. He changed his 5 fingers to 10 fingers. A majestic and torrential sound reverberated. As he changed his hand gestures quickly, he directly cut into the essence of the song. At this moment, he recalled the scene of his battle with Qin Hao at the auction in Golden Light City. That day, he lost 3 battles and was utterly defeated. He didn't have any dignity as a genius of the southern region and became the laughingstock of the southern region. However, at this moment, what was imprinted in his mind was the image of Qin Hao wielding his sword. His steps were as if he was stepping on the mountains and rivers of the universe. Wherever the tip of his sword pointed, he was invincible. It was like the best portrayal of a song, completely suppressing Changhe Luo's Tsujing. Scene after scene continuously assaulted Changhe Luo's nerves. Even though his internal organs were shaken to the point of unbearable pain, he was like a zither demon going berserk. His 10 fingers strummed the strings as he sank into Qin Hao's murderous intent. Using the sound of the zither, he outlined the phantom of a king, holding the emperor's sword in his hand, and charged towards Han Qingji. At this moment, an emperor's domineering aura enveloped the entire Taoist hall. For a moment, everyone in the 7 peaks was in an uproar. What an arrogant emperor's aura! Tian Quan was slightly surprised. This song wasn't very brilliant. Moreover, Changhe Lo's cultivation was pitifully low. He hadn't even stepped into the true emperor's path. However, the emperor's will contained in his song was too strong. It was like a murderous intent, portraying a great emperor of flesh and blood who was awe-inspiring in front of everyone's eyes. Ning Tianqing frowned slightly. He had heard this song once before. It was during the grand auction held by Ning Wu in Golden Light City that was held once every 5 years. However, at that time, Changhe Lo's sovereign descent song was completely different from today's. It only had the form and didn't truly display the aura of a great emperor. Now, the emperor's will was very strong. It was as if a great emperor was born from the song, walking in front of the crowd and shocking the world. Zheng Qingqi also had the same feeling. However, his gaze was fixed on Qin Hao. The emperor's figure charging toward Qingji Han clearly had Qin Hao's shadow. Chapter 1525. Majestic Guqin music filled the training ground. Changhe Lo used his Guqin will to condense an illusory figure, as if an emperor had arrived before the battle. Holding the emperor's sword in his hand, a blazing light burst forth as he slashed down at Han Qingji. The peerless might that could swallow the world was praised by the disciples of the various peaks. Many of the older disciples who had stepped into the emperor realm were able to see a trace of the true essence of the emperor realm from the body of the phantom. Qingji Han frowned. She was shocked by the emperor's phantom. She couldn't help but feel a faint sense of admiration, as if she had seen a real emperor. There were many emperors in the East Continent, and not all of them could make her feel admiration. She only felt this way when facing the sunset battle god of the East Continent and Empress Ling Xian. But now, she was affected by Changhe Lo's Guqin. She felt like she was falling into his music. Boom! Han Qingji lifted her palm and slammed it forward. Her mind was in a trance for only an instant before she immediately recovered. Her jade-like hands that seemed fair and soft actually contained a sharp and tyrannical might. A resplendent platinum palm imprint flew out, slamming forward heavily, annihilating the Emperor Phantom with a single palm strike. It was incomparably domineering. Her Guqin intent is very strong, but her cultivation is too weak. Tian Quan said. After all, he was just a fake emperor. Even if his Guqin skills were extraordinary, the difference in cultivation between them was too big. He couldn't resist Qingji Han at all. Qingji Han only said that she wouldn't use the emperor's will or the meditation art, but she didn't promise to suppress her cultivation. Based on the situation, she was going to crush Changhe Lo. Perfected Lord Daozong nodded and said, "Let's not forget one thing. Qingji Han's soul is the eye of nirvana. She has always been the one to influence the will of others. She will never be influenced by others. Throughout the ancient times, those who possessed the eye of nirvana were all extremely powerful existences with extremely high achievements. They were all representative experts of every era. Even if Qingji Han didn't use the meditation art, Changhe Lo's Guqin wouldn't be able to shake her soul. This was the difference in talent. At this moment, the dazzling palm print shattered the Guqin illusion and continued to move forward towards Changhe Lo. Changhe Lo felt a suffocating pressure sweep over him. The strong sense of suppression was just like the time when he faced Qin Hao. It was difficult to resist. His 10 fingers swept across the strings of the Guqin, and his Guqin's spirit shone with a dazzling light. It turned into a musical enchantment in front of him. Then, there was a deafening explosion. The palm print hit the musical enchantment. Although he had blocked Qingji Han's attack, he was still sitting on the ground. His snow-white hair was messy, and he was clearly struggling. Changhe Lo, that's enough. You're no match for him. Don't embarrass yourself and embarrass the Xianyuan clan. A member of the Xianyuan family yelled at the training hall, telling him to give up. Battle the heavens. Changhe Lo turned a deaf ear to him. His eyes flashed with an even stronger fighting spirit. Xianyuan? Now, they remembered that he was Xianyuan Wuying's adopted son and remembered his identity. Why didn't anyone from the Xianyuan family come to visit him when he was imprisoned on the Dustfall platform and burned by lightning and fire? He was fighting to find his original heart. Now, the Xianyuan family thought he was an embarrassment. Did he embarrass the Southern Pride family and bring shame to the Southern Pride royal family? He waved his fingers even more wildly. He forgot everything. It had nothing to do with fame and fortune. He only wanted to find his true self on the martial path. Changhe Lo seemed to have fallen into a frenzy. He was intoxicated and played to his heart's content. The battle song was even more exciting than the sovereign's descent. It made people's blood boil. It filled the void and melted into the great path. A huge sun appeared in the sky above the training hall. The flames burned brightly. It shot out the divine light of the sun and fell on Qingji Han's head. A hurricane suddenly rose. The wind pressure carried the power to destroy mountains. It swallowed forward, and the training hall trembled. The blizzard raged and covered the sky. Ice and snow flooded the ground as if to bury Qingji Han. Ancient beasts, soaring dragons, circling phoenixes. At this moment, they appeared vividly. The disciples of the various peaks gasped in amazement. This was especially true when a 300-meter-tall golden ape was condensed from the zither music. It stood in the air and smashed down with a huge staff. It was so domineering that even Hai Sha, who came from the Golden Ape clan, couldn't help but exclaim, "Nice!" The true meaning of this huge golden ape was drawn out by Changhe Lo's zither. It was wild and wild. It didn't submit to the heavens, didn't respect the earth, and didn't fear the gods and demons. It shocked the people of the 7 peaks, the manifestation of the heavens and earth. Demons dance wildly. Only the zither in Changhe Lo's hands is worthy of the battle of the heavens. Qin Hao, who was disguised as Shou Wuk, said as he watched the battle. The will of the battle song was even more exciting than before. Changhe Lo was clearly affected by something. He stepped out of his self-satisfied state and entered a new height. Unfortunately, although the song had improved, the opponent was even stronger. Destruction of the heavens. Qingji Han's qi surged. Her body broke through the air. A huge wave of spiritual energy radiated. It was as if it had shaken the heavens. She directly broke through the sun. She raised her palm and blasted out a 5-fingered illusory peak, which fell on the head of the huge ape. The impassioned sound of the zither poured into the body of the huge ape. A deafening roar sounded in the dojo. The huge staff swung out. Heaven and earth roared as it swept towards the falling 5-fingered illusory peak. Rumble. In this collision, the great Tao seemed to be smashed. The terrifying sound of the explosion shook everyone's eardrums. However, the huge staff shattered. The 5-fingered illusory peak pressed down and crushed the body of the huge golden ape. The huge ape struggled to support it. It was as if Changhe will was supporting the heavens. Cruelly, it still couldn't bear the weight of the five-fingered illusory peak. It was suppressed and annihilated. "Break for me!" Han Qingji let out a shrill cry. Her spirit, which was filled with the power of nirvanic extermination, swept out. The terrifying spirit spread out. Anything that was affected by her spirit web, be it giant dragons or phoenixes, melted the blizzard, shattered the hurricane, disintegrated the heavens, and all living things were annihilated. With just a thought, it swept across the heavens. Puff! A mouthful of blood sprayed on the zither strings. The impassioned battle music stopped. Chang'e's mind was invaded by the power of destruction. Like a withered flower, his aura weakened rapidly. His spiritual energy was severely damaged. He couldn't muster up any fighting spirit. "You're too weak. You're not worthy of my primordial spirit." Qingji Han stood in the air. Her cold eyes looked down at Chang'e. She was like a high and mighty empress looking down on him. So far, not only had she not released her emperor's will, she hadn't used the art of meditation. She hadn't even released her primordial spirit. Chang'e couldn't resist the invasion of her spiritual energy. Were all half-step great emperors so useless? Chang'e, admit defeat. A disciple of the Xianyuan family couldn't help but say. Qingji Han was too powerful. The first princess of the East Continent wasn't someone they could challenge. Even if Prince Jie were alive, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. Another person sighed. Chang'e had tried his best, but Qingji Han was too strong and ruthless. In this generation of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Jie's talent was unparalleled. He was born with the great emperor's body and inherited the great Tao of gravity. He was completely obsessed with martial arts and couldn't extricate himself. He had been secretly trained by the family and had never shown his talent to the outside world. In fact, Xianyuan Jie's combat power was very abnormal. It was just that before he had the time to blossom, he was killed by Qin Hao. Even so, if he were alive, he wouldn't dare to fight with Qingji Han. Chang'e was simply asking for it. "I want to try again." Chang'e wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Under his messy white hair, he didn't look dispirited. On the contrary, he smiled happily. He put down his burdens and fought with all his heart. He fought with the true genius of the continent and understood his opponent's martial arts power. He didn't have to care about what others thought and didn't have to worry about his reputation. Even if he lost, he would lose happily. If you had a musical essence spirit, you would definitely be the best disciple of Master. In this battle, I have seen the glory of the first princess of the East Continent. I will take the last move. Chang'e sat upright and looked up into the sky with a smile. He didn't think it was embarrassing to be looked down at by Qingji Han. At this moment, Qingji Han's cold eyes flashed with a sharp light. Was he using her to practice? Was Chang'e worthy? Buzz! A Guqin intent surged into the sky. Chang'e pulled the strings again, but this time his fingers were no longer as nimble. He was hit by the power of nirvana, and his mind was in a mess. It was already very difficult for him to sit upright. But this Guqin sound contained a kind of law. The law that he had just comprehended was not complete. It was only a prototype, but he wanted to give it a try. This was the first time he released his law power. It turned out that unknowingly, he had already grown from a poor boy in a dilapidated village to a powerhouse that was respected and revered by the martial artists of the continent. This was something that he didn't dare to imagine in the past, but he also longed for. The Guqin sound filled the air and fell on Qingji Han. Invaded by the Guqin sound, her mind shook as if she was in another world. There was nothing here. The sky was covered with boundless weeds, full of desolation. It was like a world that was spurned by people. This was Chang'e's law concept, born from his heart. Although it was desolate, it made one feel incomparably small. It was like a heaven and earth that could not be defied. It trapped one's will, making it impossible to escape. One would forever have to live in this place that no one cared about, I call it boundless. I haven't discovered the true power of this law yet, but it is like my home. When I was young, I was born in this kind of place. It may be ugly, but I actually like it very much. In the desolate and dilapidated world, Changhe Lo's words echoed. Qingji Han was dumbfounded on the spot. He dared to use it on others without unearthing the power of the law. He had just comprehended the prototype of the law, and he wanted to let her, the first princess of the East Continent, experience it, get lost. Han Qingji's fury surged as if she had been greatly humiliated. Her boundlessly tyrannical mental power wreaked havoc, destroying this barren world. An incomparably terrifying abyssal eye appeared in the sky, shooting out an endless amount of sharp, killing light. Rays of light crisscrossed, and endless rays of light spread. Space was torn apart, heaven and earth were shattered, and Changhe Lo's law concepts suddenly disappeared. Swoosh! A ray of dazzling light shot down from the void and poured into Changhe Lo's mind. In the training hall, a shrill scream sounded. Everyone saw that Changhe Lo's Guqin soul collapsed on the spot. He hugged his head with both hands and rolled on the ground as if he had suddenly gone insane. Blood began to ooze out of his 7 orifices, as if his spirit had suffered extremely serious damage. Chapter 1526. Translator, Nyoibo, Studio Editor. Nyoibo, Studio. The battle of the strongest. The moment the light from the eye of Nirvana invaded his mind, Changhe Lo felt as if he had fallen into a demonic abyss. A terrifying blood coffin appeared in his mind. It was boundlessly huge, and blood seeped out from the gaps in the coffin. Rotten hands climbed out from the coffin, and broken bodies crawled out. Those faces were people he was familiar with, enemies he had killed with his own hands. Countless rotten bodies crawled out, and like vengeful spirits, they surrounded Changhe Lo. Maggot-covered hands dragged him into the blood coffin, wanting to bury him with them. At that moment, Changhe Lo felt as if his mind and soul were being pulled into the coffin. His will collapsed on the spot. He had the idea of sparring with Qingji Han normally, trying out the laws he had just comprehended. Unexpectedly, the other party's counterattack was so fierce. In the training hall, the disciples of the 7 Peaks watched in shock. Qingji Han was domineering and fierce, instantly suppressing Changhe Lo. They didn't know how much damage his mind had suffered. Without using the laws of Emperor Intent or the Tranquil Heart Art, just a strand of soul power was enough to make the Yao Guang, immortal monarch's personal disciple, unable to resist. She lived up to her reputation as the #1 princess of the East Continent. Stop! A dignified voice rang out. It was the voice of the Yao Guang, immortal monarch, who was sitting on the platform. It contained overwhelming Tao intent and instantly dispersed the nirvana soul power that had invaded Changhe Lo's mind, waking him up. The blood coffin disappeared, and Changhe Lo's mind gradually recovered. At this moment, his hair was disheveled, and he looked at Qingji Han with a look of fear. His clothes were soaked in cold sweat. "Qingji, you went a little overboard," said Yao Guang. Changhe Lo had just peeked into the half-step emperor realm, and the laws he had comprehended were only in the embryonic form. They didn't have any destructive power. There was a certain gap between his cultivation and Qingji Han's. Even if she didn't use the emperor intent, the terrifying nirvana soul power wasn't something Changhe Lo could contend against. "I wasn't able to control myself," Han Qingji replied. She glanced at Changhe Lo coldly, her face still filled with anger. What kind of status did she have? Changhe Lo dared to use her as a sparring partner? In the East Continent, such a person would have been killed by her on the spot. However, since her master said that she was too heavy-handed, there was no need for her to refute. After all, Yao Guang had treated her well, and she had always held respect and gratitude in her heart. "From today onward, you shall be one of the peak seats of my peak. You shall spread the Tao Peak's sound technique," Yao Guang said. "Yes, master." Qingji Han bowed in the direction of the Tao platform and stepped into the ranks of the first seats. She stood beside Yi Zue and silently glanced at Xiao Han. If not for Changhe Lo's interference, she would have been able to intimidate the entire peak, and no one would dare to challenge her. The Eye of Nirvana is truly tyrannical. Although Changhe Lo hasn't truly stepped into the Emperor realm, he is proficient in music, and his will is incomparably strong. Even so, he couldn't resist the Nirvana soul at all, commented Daoist canon. This was enough to set off Qingji Han's ability. Looking at the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, the personal disciples of the peak masters, such as Mo Xian, Zhou Wudao, and Zhang Yi, were all powerful. Even if they were at the same level, it would be difficult for them to resist. Only a peerless genius like Xiao Han, who was born with a spirit body of the Great Path, was qualified to compete with Qingji Han. Yao Wang deity nodded in agreement. Qingji Han's talent was indeed outstanding. She was already standing at the top of this generation of martial artists. Then, her eyes fell on Changhe Lo. She said, "Changhe Lo, you should also step down. Although you lost this battle, we saw your growth. Remember your original intentions, and you can prove the Great Path. I hope you will break through soon. Thank you for your teachings, Master. I will live up to your expectations." Changhe Lo stood up and bowed. His face was haggard. He dragged his tired body back to the team of Yaowang Peak. No one was willing to come forward to help him. After he returned to the team, no one even said a word of concern. There were even some snickers among the disciples, as if they were laughing at him for overestimating himself. Changhe Lo's expression was calm. He had long been accustomed to this because he had always been alone. At this time, his heart was as calm as water, and he would no longer bear a grudge against the mockery. He wanted to walk a path different from the past, a path of purity. The opinions of others didn't matter. He only wanted to prove his original intentions and the great path of the Emperor. Your disciple seems to have changed a lot. This is a good thing. Migrez nodded. He could feel the subtle changes. Next, the competition for the position of the peak continued. Mo Xian and Su Jin stepped out of the line at the same time. As if they had agreed beforehand, they stood in the middle of the training hall with extraordinary tacit understanding. The two of them didn't fight intensely, and there weren't any sparks. The scene was surprisingly calm. As the power of the realm unfolded, Mo Xian and Su Jin entered a battle of consciousness, just like how Qin Hao fought Feng Qianli. In the end, Mo Xian won and became the second candidate for the Yaowang Peak's peak seat. At that moment, Su Jin confidently returned to the team. His condition was extremely good, as if he hadn't used any energy at all. It was unknown how he and Mo Xian had sparred in the realm battle, but even Mo Xian couldn't see the slightest bit of exhaustion. Mizar Hall's Zhang Yi and Mizar Hall's Haisha, Xintian Peak's Xiaowa and Gu Kuei, Taiwei Peak's Tangung and Northgate Xuanda. One after another, the candidates for the peak seats were born one after another. In the end, 12 were chosen to become the new chief. Migrez Hall's Qin Hao was alone. Uni Peak's Ning Tianxing was alone. The other 5 peaks each had 2. These 12 people were this year's new peak seats. They would replace the positions of Eastern Sky, Yizue, and Shanghua, and become the role model for the disciples of the Divine Palace's 7 peaks. However, what puzzled all the peak masters and elders present was that during the whole process, except for Ning Tianxing's strong sweep of a peak and the collision between Qingji Han and Changhe Lo, the rest of the people didn't fight. All of them ended in a battle of consciousness, and no one was injured. For some reason, this group of disciples was extremely strange, just like the agreed half. Although Migrez, Daozong, Yun Yi, and the 7 peak masters didn't understand, they didn't think it was unreasonable. It was the disciples' freedom to use whatever method to compete, and they had no right to interfere. From today onwards, the 12 of you will be the peak seats of the Divine Palace's 7 peaks. You will set an example, abide by the rules of the Divine Palace, and inherit the martial arts spirit of the Divine Palace. Migrez stood up and said. All the peak masters stood up at the same time and bowed in the direction of Migrez Peak. Set an example, abide by the rules of the Divine Palace, inherit the martial arts spirit of the Divine Palace, and may the martial arts of the sect prosper. Qin Hao and the others, as well as the 12 peak seats of the previous Eastern Sky, all bowed in the direction of Migrez Peak. The disciples of the 7 peaks in the training hall all looked at them with envy. They really hoped that the people standing in the line of peak seats were themselves. After all, each peak seat was a candidate for the peak master, and there was a great chance that they would cultivate to the Nirvana realm in the future. A Nirvana realm great emperor. What a tyrannical and monstrous cultivation. Once they stepped into the secular world, no one would be able to stop them. It was possible that they could sweep across the four regions. No one knew how strong the sunset battle god of the East Continent was, except for Qingji Han. But the disciples all agreed that no matter how strong the sunset battle god was, his cultivation was probably on par with the peak seat of the divine palace. How many sunset battle gods were there in the East Continent? There was only one, Zhan Wu. But the divine palace had always maintained the tradition of having 12 peak seats of the Nirvana realm. Such power was very explosive. I'm so envious of the Nirvana realm great emperor. It's said that his lifespan has surpassed the limit of a great emperor, and he has a lifespan of more than 2,000 years. Life is a good thing. Who doesn't want to live more? More than that, don't forget the divine palace's edict. The goal of the peak masters is to break through to the divine level and ascend to the vast deity realm. The legendary deity realm. That's what makes us envious. Legends are legends after all. Who knows if there are divine-level overlords in the history of the divine wilderness? Even if a martial lord ancestral patriarch became a god, there hasn't been a second person in the divine palace for a long time. There's no proof at all. Shut up. Look at the situation. Don't let the peak masters hear us and punish us. The disciples discussed. Becoming a god was the ultimate goal of the divine palace's peak masters. Even though there hadn't been a second divine-level overlord, every peak master had the cultivation of the Nirvana realm. This terrible power was enough to make the disciples yearn for it. Buzz. Brilliant light appeared above the platform. At the same time, the world-shaking divine soldier appeared one by one. The 12 golden battle suits were lined up side by side. The turbulent emperor's chi rolled and spread, suppressing the entire platform. It was the Xiantian Peak's 12 divine soldier. Today, you are their masters. The Xiantian deity smiled. As an elder, this was a gift to the disciples. She raised her hand and motioned for the 12 new peak masters to come forward and take it. At this moment, Qin Hao and the others stepped forward at the same time toward the platform. They stared at the 12 battle suits. Everyone's goal was very clear. Only Xiao Han and Qingji Han walked toward one of the battle suits together. The shape of the battle suit was Pisces entwined. Qingji Han stepped forward and turned to block Xiao Han. She said coldly, "Do you still want to fight with me?" "Fight?" Xiao Han looked at her. "When did the rules say that it belongs to you?" When they were at the Xiantian Peak, the divine soldier was in the box. They couldn't see its true appearance, but they could feel the tyrannical spiritual will. Now the divine soldier appeared in the form of Pisces. But this wasn't important. What was important was who should take it. At this time, the first princess of the Dongzhou continent and the pearl of Emperor Shao of the northern frontier stood face to face. Their faces were incomparably beautiful. Strong sparks appeared in the eyes of the two women again. A wave of battle intent spread, which also alarmed the others. Qin Hao and the others all stopped. "You all want it?" the Xiantian deity asked on the platform. "Yes," Xiao Han and Qingji Han replied in unison. "Interesting." The Yaoguang deity glanced at the Xiantian deity. "In that case, senior sister, why don't you let them spar? The winner will get it." Previously, Xiao Han and Qingji Han had already fought when the Fire Beacon Grand Banquet was held at the Xiantian Peak. It would be difficult to persuade them today. Besides, who should they persuade? It wouldn't be good to persuade either of them to withdraw. In that case, they should let them fight. "Do as junior sister Yao Guang says. You can decide for yourselves," the Xiantian deity said. "Do you dare to come down?" Qingji Han's primordial chi surged, and she landed on the platform. She stared at Xiao Han. A terrifying emperor chi emanated from her body. The platinum light was incomparably strong. Obviously, she would use all her strength in this battle. She wouldn't be as casual as she was with Chang Alo. If she used all her strength, how could Xiao Han stop her? "Why wouldn't I dare?" Xiao Han touched the ground with the tip of her toes, stretched out her arms, and floated down from the platform. In an instant, the same intense platinum light erupted like a whirlwind circling around her. Her aura was strong and powerful. Something big is about to happen. The disciples of the Seven Peaks were slightly shocked. The battle between two empresses who had truly stepped into the Emperor realm was probably going to be very intense. Everyone in the Seven Peaks knew that Xiao Han's talent was equally terrifying. During the Fallen Emperor Bei test, she actually suppressed Qingji Han. Their battle would definitely not be like Changhe Lo, who was completely crushed. It would be an evenly matched battle. Martial niece Yao Guang, my disciple Xiao Han, is not Changhe Lo. Are you really not worried about letting them fight? Daozong said with a smile. He was very calm. Martial uncle, Qingji hasn't met a worthy opponent yet. Why don't we watch? Yao Guang replied with a smile. The two peak venerables seemed to be vaguely competing with each other. In that case, why don't we add another battle? Qin Hao, do you dare to come down from the platform and fight? Suddenly, Ning Tianqing turned around and landed on the platform. His proud eyes stared at the successor of the Divine Palace Master of Migrez Hall. He wanted to fight Qin Hao. Chapter 1527. Everyone's hearts trembled as they looked at the three figures in the arena. The first princess of the East Continent, the proud daughter of Xiao Wudi of the Northern Frontier, and the crown prince of the martial Ning Empire. All three of them were extremely talented and could be said to be at the peak of their generation. The battle between Qingji Han and Xiao Han was already exciting enough. But no one expected that Crown Prince Ning Wu would also challenge Qin Hao at this time. Qin Hao was the disciple of Palace Lord Migrez and the absolute core of the Divine Palace. He was recognized as the strongest person in the Seven Peaks. Was Ning Tianqing trying to prove something by challenging Qin Hao? In any case, the atmosphere in the training hall reached a boiling point. Everyone felt the blood in their body churning and their emotions becoming extremely excited. This battle would definitely be the most exciting confrontation of this year's Truth Symposium. It was enough for everyone to feast their eyes on. In the past assessment, the Emperor's Mirror was used to test a warrior's fate. I have the fate of the great Emperor. Everyone can see that. Although your fate is not obvious, the mirror unexpectedly collapsed. After entering the Divine Palace, Palace Lord Migrez accepted you as his disciple. In fact, at that time, I was not convinced. But it's all in the past. Ning Tianqing looked at Qin Hao and said, Today's battle will let the Seven Peak Masters see if the first place in the assessment of the fallen Emperor Bei is worthy of the title of the strongest talent of our generation. It will also test our cultivation. When we were at the Xiantian Peak, didn't you say that you wanted to learn from me? If so, I will accompany you. As Ning Tianqing's words fell, everyone understood. Obviously, Crown Prince Ningwu was not convinced and wanted to use this battle to prove that his talent was not below Qin Hao. He wanted to take back his original position of first place. It was as if that position should belong to him and not Qin Hao. Moreover, Qin Hao did say that he wanted to fight with him. On the right side of the first place team, Shou Wuk, who was standing next to Shenghua, had a dim look in his eyes. He certainly knew that the person Ning Tianqing really wanted to challenge was actually him. The existence that looked like Qin Hao on the right was actually the Dragon Spirit Dharma idol, not Qin Hao himself. On the day of the Fire Beacon Feast, Xiao Han was fighting with Qingji Han when he was suddenly attacked by Ning Tianqing's Guqin. That Guqin was called a dissuasion, but in reality, it was only aimed at Xiao Han. Obviously, it was very selfish and wanted to protect Qingji Han. Of course, Qin Hao couldn't turn a blind eye to it. As a man, he would never allow an outsider to bully his woman. Qin Hao was not afraid of competing with Ning Tianqing, but he had neglected the fact that Ning Tianqing had chosen today, when he was pretending to be Shou Wuk, to compete with him. It should be known that what maintained Qin Hao's appearance was only his Dharma form. Let his Dharma form fight with Ning Tianqing? How about it? As a disciple of the Palace Lord, you have been taught by the Seven Peaks secret techniques. Even if you haven't stepped into the Arch Realm, You have already mastered the complete nomological power. You won't be afraid of a battle, right? Ning Tianxing said. On the day of the Xintian Peak, he released a guqin sound, which was swallowed by the starry sky released by Qin Hao. The bright starry sky contained the power of the great Tao, and it already had the complete nomological power. Therefore, in this battle, Ning Tianxing would not suppress his realm to fight. He would use all his strength and seriously compete with Qin Hao. He also knew very well that even if the other party had not stepped into the Arch realm, he had the absolute qualifications to compete with the early-stage Arch Yuan. Once he went easy on him, he would only be the one who would suffer. Moreover, Qin Hao himself was not weak, and he had received the teachings of the 7 Peak Venerables. Every kind of Arch realm technique he cultivated was extremely strong. Ning Tianxing would not make a stupid mistake, and he would use all his strength to deal with it. At this moment, the eyes of the disciples of the 7 Peaks were all focused on the position of the Dharma idol. In their eyes, that person was Qin Hao, the disciple of the Palace Lord. If Qin Hao did not agree, he would become the laughingstock of the 7 Peaks. He probably couldn't afford to lose face. Tian Quan, what do you think? Old Taoist Yun, he looked at the Palace Lord. Although Ning Tianxing was his disciple, he had also taught Qin Hao before. These 2 juniors were extremely talented. In all fairness, in perfected Lord Yun Yi's heart, he couldn't tell who was better. Qin Hao, what do you think? Tian Quan said with his eyes closed. He wanted to ask for his disciple's opinion first. The voice rumbled out, spreading throughout the Dao Plaza. Others might not have been able to sense it, but Qin Hao, who had transformed into a headless, unblemished head, felt his heart tremble. This voice was clearly directed at him, and it was like the sound of a bell ringing in his ears. I've been seen through. Qin Hao was shocked. He deliberately imitated Shou Wu's aura, suppressing the soul power in his body. His entire body was only surrounded by sword intent, as if he was a natural swordsman. Even if he used in the Arch Realm's secret technique to cover it up, his master still saw through his true identity. How terrifying was Nirvana the Great. But his master did not expose him, and even silently warned him. Clearly, even if Tian Quan did not know why Qin Hao was pretending to be Shou Wu, he still chose to believe in his disciple. I accept your challenge on behalf of Qin Hao. Shou Wu took a step forward, and sword intent rumbled around him. His sharp eyes were like 2 rays of sword light, piercing towards the center of the training hall. Ning Tianxing turned his head slightly and looked at Shou Wu of Daozong Peak. The successor of the southern region, Sword Emperor, who also came from a royal family, was not inferior to the martial Ning Empire. Moreover, this person had always been regarded as the true number 1 in the southern region for 2 generations. He was known to be unparalleled in the way of the sword. The martial lord once said that he was qualified to become a sword god. Now, Shou Wu was also a peak, representing the will of Daozong Peak. However, Ning Tianxing was not interested in him. Even if Shou Wu was born with the way of the sword in Ning Tianxing's heart, this person was still not enough. You're no match for me, Ning Tianxing replied indifferently. He could only challenge Qin Hao, the only person in the continent who was qualified to accept a challenge. The successor of the southern region's Sword Emperor was not qualified. What nonsense are you talking about? A disciple of Daozong Peak roared. This Ning Tianxing was too arrogant. He had not even fought, and he dared to say that the peak of Daozong Peak was not enough. If you want to fight, I'll withdraw, because I never fight a battle that has a result, Ning Tianxing said. Finally, he looked at Fa Xiang with a faint look of disappointment and prepared to leave the training hall. Qin Hao did not even have the courage to face him. Okay, I'll fight with you, Fa Xiang said. As he spoke, he walked step by step towards the center of the training hall. You're no match for him. Qin Hao secretly transmitted his voice, and his expression tensed up. Do I have a choice? Fa Xiang walked past Shou Wu step by step and came to the opposite side of Ning Tianxing. Just to learn from each other? Just to learn from each other, Ning Tianxing replied, feeling a wave of excitement in his heart. He was finally willing to come down. Did you hear that? Just to learn from each other. Fa Xiang turned around and smiled at Qin Hao. Although he had replicated Qin Hao's ability and grasped the essence of his martial way, he also had the power of Qin Hao's 3 souls. Unfortunately, Fa Xiong did not have the body of a demigod, nor did he have the vast spirit of a great emperor like Qin Hao. There was a fundamental difference between them, which was very important. If Qin Hao fought with Ning Tianxing, he would not be afraid of being crushed by his emperor's will. Even if he had not stepped into the great emperor realm, his soul was already at the level of a great emperor. It was the greatest counterattack weapon, and also Qin Hao's protective talisman against great emperors. However, Fa Xiang's soul was very weak. After stepping into the great emperor realm, he only had the power of an emperor. Even with the Red Lotus Overlord Fire, the Dragon's Soul, and the Tranquil Water to recover, he could not withstand the suppression of Ning Tianxing's emperor's will. It seemed like a small difference, but it was the key to their strength. Fa Xiang would definitely lose this battle. Fa Xiang knew in his heart that he was no match for Ning Xingtian, but he had to stand up now because he had no other choice. Should he fight? He had to stall for time so that the real Show What could complete his plan before he was defeated. If he did not fight, Qin Hao would become the laughingstock of the 7 Peaks. It was not a big deal to become a laughingstock, but there was no guarantee that it would not attract the attention of the mastermind behind the Divine Palace. Because the real Qin Hao was never afraid of battle. In that case, let's fight 2 on 2. Seeing this, Xiao Han came to Fa Xiang's side and stood side by side. Although he knew it was fake, he could vaguely sense a trace of Qin Hao from Fa Xiang. No problem. Ning Xingtian took the initiative to walk to Qingji Han's side. At this moment, the 4 of them faced each other, and the atmosphere seemed to be still. But the hearts of all the disciples in the training hall were beating wildly, and their blood flowed faster. They were so excited that they could not help but want to shout and howl. Qin Hao, who had disguised himself as Fa Xiang, retreated back into the group. This contest was already a foregone conclusion. Xiao Han had chosen to fight 2v2 with the intention of assisting Fa Xiang, hoping that Fa Xiang could last a little longer. Let's do it! Qingji Han was very reluctant to join forces with Ning Tianxing, but she also knew that if they did not join forces, they would be defeated one by Xiao Han and Qin Hao. Buzz! 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 4 dazzling lights exploded in the training hall, like 4 violent storms raging. The sweeping power was enough to make people tremble in fear. Whether one was a top genius or not, at this moment, it was enough for people to tell. Each of these 4 waves of power steadily overshadowed Chang'e's. They were really domineering. Although in the 4 storms of vitality, Qin Hao of Migre's palace was surging with golden flames, which symbolized the Runhuang Plain. Under the influence of a layer of inexplicable power, his golden flames were far beyond the ordinary Runhuang Plain, reaching a frightening level. Its strength was as terrifying as the Emperor's Qi. It was Fa Xiang who was using the endless samsara technique. Buzz! The void changed color. On one side of the training hall, where Qingji Han was, the entire place was shrouded in haze. The haze was like a black wave that pushed forward wildly, wanting to kill Qin Hao and the others. This was a layer of spiritual waves with a terrifying death attribute. At the same time, Ning Tianxing's Guqin spirit appeared. He sat in the air, his palms sweeping like the wind. Platinum musical notes danced, wrapped in the power of the Great Path rules, turning into countless transparent swords that fell from the sky. The rain of swords flew, covering the sky and the sun. The whistling sword light cut through the sky, as fast as lightning. The scene of tens of thousands of swords falling was like the end of the world, about to destroy the entire Path Peak. This terrifying scene made the hearts of the disciples of the 7 Peaks tremble. The combination of the strong and the strong was simply too powerful. Not to mention how terrifying Qingji Han's spirit of nirvana was. Just the sword rain of the void played by Ning Tianxing and the power of the rules that came whistling down were not much weaker than Shouwuk's 10,000 swords Empyrean Peak. If it were anyone else, they would probably be sitting on the ground and waiting for death. Chapter 1528. The power of nirvana engulfed the sky, and in the void, the sword rain fell. At this moment, Xiao Han's body erupted with a brilliant light as he released his source spirit. The resplendent crown on his head was like a fountain as it emitted an endless divine radiance. It occupied half the sky and blocked Han Qingji's nirvana spirit. Move! Xiao Han pointed upwards, and the will of the emperor rose to meet the sword rain. Under the influence of the rules, a fault appeared in the sky, and the sword rain fell into the fault, disappearing one after another. At the same time, Ning Tianqing's expression changed slightly as he felt a suffocating pressure above his head. Just as he looked up, he saw a sharp light fill the sky. The sword rain that had disappeared above Xiao Han's head fell towards the two of them. Ning Tianqing and Qingji Han immediately retreated. Swish, 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 swish. Countless swords fell from the void, and rays of light flashed. Each sword was incomparably sharp and could destroy one's soul. However, when the sword rain fell into the training hall, it melted into the ground as if it had fallen into a quagmire. The entire Uni Peak was enveloped by an array, and the stone slabs were formed by the array. So strong, the disciples were shocked. Uni Peak was worthy of being called the strongest peak in the Divine Palace. Even when such destructive swords fell, they could not damage it in the slightest. Of course, it was not only the peak that was strong. Xiao Han released her soul power and rules. Not only did she block Ning Tianqing and Qingji Han's attacks, she even redirected the attacks to the two of them. 1 against 2, she did not retreat at all. During this time, Qin Hao did not even make a move. Spatial shift. Ning Tianqing stared at Xiao Han, and his expression was no longer as relaxed. The other party could dissolve the attack out of thin air, create a fault in space in a short time, and redirect the attack to the target. This kind of rule was very strong. Why don't you make a move? Xiao Han took a few deep breaths. It was not easy to resist the power of nirvanic extermination head-on. Moreover, she had used her rules to move Ning Tianqing's void sword rain away. Forcefully controlling someone else's rules consumed a lot of her energy. Wait for the right time. The Dharma idol replied calmly. Without entering the imperial realm, it could not resist the suppression of Ning Tianqing's imperial will, including Qingji Han's destructive power. If it wanted to break through its opponent's defensive line, it would have to gather its strongest attack and forcefully break through. However, that kind of powerful attack would not be able to hit its opponent. Moreover, it would consume a lot of energy, so it needed to find the best opportunity to attack. Xiao Han was a little depressed. It seemed that this fake body was indeed very different from the real Qin Hao. If it had been Qin Hao just now, he definitely wouldn't have let go of the opportunity to attack the moment she moved the void sword rain away. At most, I can block the attacks, but I can't guarantee how long I can last. You'll have to act according to the situation. Xiao Han said. Ning Tianqing and Qingji Han were also extremely strong. If this continued, her strength would be limited. Fa Xiang remained silent. He stared at Ning Tianqing with his sharp eyes, which were like two beams of spear light. You guard against Xiao Han. I'll be the main attacker. Ning Tianqing said. Suddenly, his aura changed again. His black hair surged, and his eyes shot out a wild aura. It was as if he had become a different person. Then his 5 fingers pulled the strings, and the great Tao accents bombarded. The Guqin spirit shook out a majestic sound wave, like the roaring of the sea. Layers of sound waves rumbled continuously, enveloping all directions of the training hall and actually closing in on Xiao Han. Spatial transfer? Let's see how she can move again. In an instant, the great Tao Guqin spirit shook violently, surrounding the entire battlefield. It was everywhere. Thousands of soldiers and horses dragged the war drums, shaking everyone's hearts. It made them feel as if their hearts were about to burst and their blood wanted to spurt out from their pores. Fa Xiang's face suddenly became a little pale. He was surrounded by the great Tao accents. Layers of great Tao accents rumbled and pressed toward the center. His soul felt like it was about to shatter. His aura shook violently, and the soul power in his body showed signs of chaos. In this situation, it was difficult for him to maintain his mind, let alone counterattack. Xiao Han also felt the same, but she had stepped into the imperial realm, and the Emperor was incomparably strong. The impact was limited. Even like this, the crown source spirit had become much dimmer. Explode. As soon as Ning Xingtian finished speaking, his turbulent Emperor merged into the great Tao accents. It filled the training hall and was everywhere. It was as if he had turned into an emperor who suppressed all things. He commanded the great Tao accents to surround the two of them. Danger! Xiao Han sensed a majestic, murderous aura rolling toward them from all directions, wanting to crush them. The entire space was filled with Ning Tianxing's emperor will. It was everywhere, and there was no way to divert the attack. However, at this moment, Xiao Han's power of rules swept forward. Like a ribbon piercing through space, it wrapped around Ning Tianxing and Qingji Han. Although she couldn't divert the attack, she could change the position of both sides. Hiss! Hiss! The power of rules moved forward and penetrated Ning Tianxing's emperor will. The two types of rules collided with each other, creating an ear-piercing sound. Although Ning Tianxing was strong, Xiao Han's bloodline wasn't weak either. The ribbon pierced through like a sharp sword, completely penetrating and binding them. Ning Tianxing's brows furrowed. His emperor will filled the training hall and was pierced by an external force. Naturally, he sensed Xiao Han's intention in advance. She wanted to change the position of both sides again. This woman was difficult to deal with. Qingji Han closed her eyes. A giant eye appeared in the void. Then, she suddenly opened her eyes. A pitch-black light, like the demonic abyss, erupted. The Nirvana spirit merged with the black light and flashed into Xiao Han's eyes, attacking her divine soul. Xiao Han only felt her head shake. An 8-clawed monster appeared in her soul and tore at her soul. Then, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Her aura weakened by 30%. However, at this moment, the four of them were wrapped in a strong brilliance. In the blink of an eye, their positions were switched. Rumble. A majestic wave exploded. The training hall shook. The disciples of the Seven Peaks all jumped 3 times on the spot. They were shocked to see Ning Tianxing and Qingji Han appear at Xiao Han's original position. They were bombarded by the dozens of layers of great Tao accents. At this moment, Ning Tianxing's hair was messy. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His aura was a little chaotic. It must not be a good feeling to be bombarded by his own Guqin music. However, Qingji Han's condition was good. She was not affected. Spatial transference. How did you comprehend this rule? Ning Tianxing asked. The emperor will wrapped around his body, suppressing his chaotic qi and blood. It has nothing to do with you, right? You took the Guqin music bombardment alone. You're really good to Qingji Han. Xiao Han wiped the trace of blood from the corner of her mouth. Although she had successfully switched positions, she was still injured by Qingji Han's Nirvana spirit rule. Aren't you also protecting a man? A man hiding behind a woman. As a disciple of the Migres Palace, don't you feel ashamed? Qingji Han said coldly, referring to Qin Hao. Fa Xiang still did not utter a word, but the light in his eyes became even sharper. Release the power of rules on me. Fa Xiang transmitted his voice silently. Xiao Han's heart trembled. Release spatial transference on Qin Hao. Was he planning to face the two of them directly? He dared to attack the Emperor realm as a Renhuang. However, this was a good way to fight. He wanted to take the initiative. He probably could not penetrate Ning Tianxing's and Qingji Han's emperor will. Otherwise, he would not have waited until now to attack. Your rule is indeed difficult to deal with. However, your spiritual soul has been corroded by Qingji's Nirvana spirit rule. I will use the power of 2 spirits. With the superposition of my spirit power, you should not have enough strength to move the attack away. Ning Tianxing's right hand clenched in the air. A dazzling golden dragon scissors condensed into form. It was like two dragons at any time emitting a low roar. It was incomparably domineering. Immediately, his left hand pulled the strings. The light of rules merged into the Guqin spirit. A mighty power spread out, gathering stronger and stronger. The golden dragon scissors split into two and drilled into the Guqin spirit, emitting a dragon's roar. Spirit fusion skill. Migres was shocked. In the same realm, the strength of an essence spirit martial artist far exceeded that of an ordinary martial artist. When two different types of spirit power fused together, the explosive power was beyond imagination. Ning Tianxing, born with 3 spirits, completed a spirit fusion skill with his own strength. This child's talent in controlling spirit power is extremely high. Daozong evaluated. It was not rare for someone to complete a spirit fusion skill alone. His disciple, Yu Hui, was born with 2 spear spirits and could also do it. Ning Tianxing's 2 spirits were of different attributes, but he could still complete a spirit fusion skill independently. This was a completely different concept. Xiao Han felt the astonishing power coming from the opposite side. When 2 spirits fused and were enveloped by the Emperor's will, Ning Tianxing's attack was bound to be earth-shattering. It would be difficult for the Earth to be affected by her spatial teleportation. Moreover, her current state was not stable. Withstand this move and release your rule on me, Fa Xiang said. After this attack, the 4 of them would determine the winner. No matter the final result, Fa Xiang had done his best. Okay, Xiao Han nodded silently. This move will determine the winner. The Emperor's will on Ning Tianxing's body was extremely strong, completely turning into a huge platinum ball of light. Clang! With the sound of the zither strings, 2 white dragons roared out from the platinum ball of light. The dragons' bodies were huge, and they flew out, opening their mouths to swallow Xiao Han and Fa Xiang. The strong emperors were wrapped around the dragons' bodies, making them look like true dragons. The domineering feeling that looked down on the world suffocated the disciples of the 7 peaks. Many of the spectators' legs trembled and their facial features changed. Ning Tianxing's bloodline origin spirit merged with the Zither spirit. The rule power that burst out was too strong. How could they block it? Even Qin Hao's original body, who was standing in the lead seats team, felt a strong sense of threat. The Emperor's will contained in the 2 white dragons was too strong. He could not help but feel worried and almost could not help but fly over to attack. Teleport. Xiao Han pointed forward. The Emperor's will pierced the space and attacked Ning, Tianxing, and Qingji Han. Was it the same move again? Unfortunately, the same move would not work. Ning Tianxing looked on coldly. His body, which was floating in the air, exploded with a storm-like Emperor's will. He would definitely not be affected by the spatial teleportation. Qingji Han stood under the eye of Nirvana. Her entire body was covered by Nirvana's soul power. She was like a demon guarding a mountain, unmoving. She wanted to see how Xiao Han would sweep her away from the Nirvana law this time. Papa! With a shattering sound, Xiao Han's rule light was shattered. It was annihilated by Ning Tianxing's will of Emperor and Qingji Han's Nirvana law. As expected, it could not penetrate their defense. At this moment, a violent dragon's roar resounded through the world. The 2 white giants flew over and swallowed Xiao Han and Fa Xiang into the blood abyss dragons' mouths. Then, an earth-shattering explosion shook the world. The smoke and dust that filled the air blocked everyone's vision. Is it over? Ning Tianxing sighed slightly. He was not satisfied. Xiao Han's comprehension of the law was not bad. Unfortunately, against him and Qingji Han, he would not be able to hold on for long. He would be suppressed in the end. What disappointed him even more was that Qin Hao was not qualified to fight. He was completely suppressed by the 3 Emperors' will of Emperor and had no chance to show his ability. Did he overestimate Qin Hao? Or was it that he, Prince Ning Wu, was too strong after entering the Emperor realm? Roar! At this moment, the space above suddenly cracked. Another dragon-like creature fell down heavily, falling on Ning Tianxing's head. This dragon was actually a human form. It was wrapped in a strong, blood-red demon flame. Its scarlet eyes were extremely fierce. Chapter 1529. See Luke Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. It was just a clone. The blood-red eyes looked extremely terrifying, as if they could suck in souls. The first impression one would have when they looked into them was to run away. Ning Tianxing looked over, and his heart trembled. It turned out that Xiao Han was not preparing to shift their positions, but to send Qin Hao up. Were they going to attack by force? Looking at the huge body that was about to come closer, the dragon man looked ferocious and had a strong aura. It was the first time Ning Tianxing felt a slight pressure. He pulled the strings, and the power of rules merged into it. The Guqin spirit shot out a strand of great path accents. The accents bombarded above, trying to stop the spell from coming closer. At this moment, Fa Xiang had awakened the power of the dragon. He held the sky extinguishing spear, and his body released endless spear light. His will connected with heaven and earth, and seemed to resonate with the great Tao. Carrying the power of heaven and earth, he stabbed down with the spear. Boom! The Guqin spirit blasted out. Fa Xiang held the Tianju spear, and the tip of the spear spewed out a powerful red lotus demonic flame. Within the demonic flame, there was also a golden flame. The two flames merged, and the power suddenly increased. Break! Fa Chang roared, and the power of the dragon in his body burst out. The spear pierced through the sound of the Guqin, and into Ning Tianxing's emperor shield. The tip of the spear appeared above his head, and was only 3 feet away from his brain. The disciples of the 7 peaks all gasped, and their hearts almost stopped beating. How domineering was this physical strength? It could actually pierce through emperor-level rules. However, that was all the spear could do. It could not pierce through the remaining 3 feet, and Fa Xiang's body seemed to be frozen in midair. There was still a gap between emperors and emperors. But at this moment, a bright crown rose into the air and floated above the void. A strand of the Empress light shone down, and it went through the gap of the sky, extinguishing spear and into Ning Tianxing's emperor shield. Ning Tianxing's soul suddenly surged, and a huge Empress phantom appeared in his mind. It was incomparably majestic, as if it was going to suppress him. Xiao Han still has the strength. Ning Tianxing gritted his teeth. After being hit by his soul fusion technique, he still had the strength to help Qin Hao. In an instant, an even stronger will of the emperor spread out from Jin Ning Tianxing's body. Like a raging sea, a majestic power blasted out in all directions. He had to break free from his spear. 9 Palace wore emperor art. Dharma idol roared. His wrist was pierced by a beam of golden light. His powerful waist was also pierced by golden light. It seemed to have opened up the hidden power in his body. The red lotus demonic flames burning on his body became even more violent. They continued to corrode Ning Tianxing's emperor's will as if they were going to melt it. Rumble! A deafening roar resounded in the training hall. Finally, the floating platinum light ball was completely destroyed by the sky-extinguishing spear. A figure fell to the ground when the light ball was destroyed. Ning Tianxing frantically retreated, looking quite embarrassed. But Fa Xiang's spear still pierced through. After breaking through the obstruction, it continued to stab towards him. Stop! Qingji Han made her move. A layer of dark lightning surrounded her tall body, and the lightning intent rose crazily. The entire sky above Uni Peak was instantly covered by dark clouds. Above the void, a terrifying thunderstorm was formed. It was like a huge millstone, flashing with terrible lightning tribulation. The power of hell lightning. A few people from the East Continent's Thunderpool Palace spoke. They were Lei Jiao's junior brothers, and they all cultivated thunder techniques under the Thunder Emperor. At this moment, their faces were extremely shocked. They looked at the rotating thunderstorm in the void, and for a moment, they looked like they were in a daze. That was an extremely rare thunder element. Hell lightning. Its attack power was extremely fierce. It was said that the spirit of hell lightning was only recorded in the Thunderpool Palace, and the world had never seen it. Even though the Thunderpool Palace was full of geniuses and had gathered all kinds of thunder element geniuses, no one had ever possessed the power of hell lightning. But now, the dark light of hell lightning appeared on Qingji Han. She was also a double-soul genius. Countless people looked at Qingji Han. This first princess of the East Continent not only had the terrifying eye of the void, but also the spirit of hell lightning. She was indeed a demon. However, Qin Hao was most likely going to be miserable. Boom! Crack! The thunderstorm in the void flashed with intense brilliance, and a dark lightning bolt fell straight down, splitting the void and blasting towards Fa Xiang. At this moment, Fa Xiang was holding the sky extinguishing spear and was thrusting towards Ning Tianxing. Ning Tianxing had just used up his old power, and before he could form a new one, he was attacked by Xiao Han's Emperor's will. It was the best time to be defeated. But at the critical moment, the void lightning accurately struck Fa Xiang's body, and the terrifying lightning engulfed it, completely blocking its attack. Danger! Xiao Han shouted. Her heartstrings trembled, and she almost shouted Qin Hao's name by mistake. Fa Xiang and Qin Hao looked too similar, and their auras were also very similar. But she had no other choice. She had released the Emperor's Will Law repeatedly, and she had supported Ning Tianxing's double soul fusion technique alone. She had almost exhausted her physical strength, and even her spirit had become weak. As the hell lightning struck, the entire Uni Dao peak was engulfed by lightning. The dark lightning completely buried Fa Xiang. Even if she tried to save him, it was already too late. Crack! Rumble, rumble, rumble. The void lightning cloud millstone rotated, and endless lightning spread down wildly. In the Dao Hall, there was a painful roar, but it did not sound like a human cry. Fa Xiang was submerged in the endless sea of hell lightning, bombarded by the tyrannical thunder power, and suppressed by Qingji Han's Emperor's will. Its spiritual power was rapidly depleted, and even if it surged the Red Lotus Overlord fire with all its strength, it was difficult to refine the endless hell lightning. Gradually, everyone saw that it was trapped in the dark lightning tribulation. The burning body became weaker and weaker, until it turned into a wisp of fire and completely disappeared. The battle for the strongest chief disciple of the Divine Palace was over. That's all. Han Qingji dispersed her infernal thunder soul power, and the thunderclouds in the sky dissipated. The lightning that spread throughout the training ground also gradually disappeared. She had thought that Qin Hao the Migres Palace would be very strong, but in the end, he could not withstand her infernal thunder. But at this moment, a huge dark body swept out like a gust of wind. When the hell lightning in the Dao Hall dissipated, an incomparably sharp spear rushed directly in front of Qingji Han. The movement was so fast that it was like an afterimage, and there was no way to dodge it. Qingji Han's expression suddenly changed, and her beautiful eyes flashed with horror. At the same time, she was deeply shocked. After withstanding so many of her hell lightning, this Qin Hao still had the strength to attack. Squeak! At this moment, a pure white beast shadow rushed over from Ning Tianxing's position. The spear tip was about to pierce Qingji Han's throat when it was blocked by this beast shadow. Boom! The white beast shadow was immediately penetrated by the spear tip and exploded. However, Fa Xiang's arm went numb, and its body was also shaken back. Umph! Ning Tianxing gathered the golden dragon scissors in her palm, and with the golden light, the golden scissors wrapped in the power of rules blasted the Fa Xiang's body. The latter was thrown over and crashed in front of Xiao Han. This time, they were really defeated. The Dao Hall became quiet, and countless eyes were fixed on the four people in the Dao Hall. After a series of fierce battles, the four most outstanding geniuses were all injured. Ning Tianxing's hair was messy, and the corner of his mouth was still bleeding. Behind him, a huge white fox shadow appeared. It was his natal soul, the nine-tailed phantom fox. However, The fox shadow was missing a tail. Qing Jihan was not seriously injured, but her breathing was chaotic. But there was a complicated look in her eyes when she looked at Fa Xiong. What kind of man was that lying on the ground? After being bombarded by so many hell lightning, he was still hanging on to fight back. The killing intent of the spear was very strong. Although she knew that this was just a competition and that the spear would not really stab down at that moment, Qing Jihan still smelled the scent of death. This man was very dangerous. In comparison, Xiao Han and Fa Xiang's injuries were more serious. The former's clothes were torn in several places, and there were bloodstains. Judging from Xiao Han's pale face, it was obvious that he had used up a lot of energy. Fa Xiang's injuries were even worse. As an Emperor Realm cultivator, he had fought a great Emperor Realm cultivator head-on. In the end, he had been seriously injured, especially when Ning Tianxing had stabbed the bloodline golden scissors into his body. If this wasn't a competition but a life-threatening one, that attack would have been enough to kill him. It was obvious that Xiao Han and Fa Xiang were at a disadvantage. Ning Tianxing and Qing Jihan had won. Fascinating. Although he lost, junior brother Qin has yet to break through to the immortal Emperor realm and is already at a disadvantage. He doesn't have the qualifications to contend against the emperor intent of others. Being able to fight head-on against the emperor intent of others is already extremely rare. The middle-aged Taoist from Uni Peak spoke. His words seemed to make sense, but if one listened carefully, it seemed that his evaluation of Qin Hao was not outstanding at all. After all, his junior brother was Ning Tianxing. Many disciples nodded in agreement. Qin Hao's defeat was indeed excusable. There was a qualitative difference between the Emperor Realm and the Great Emperor Realm. If it had been someone else, perhaps Ning Tianxing would have been able to suppress them with one move. But Qin Hao's spear had pierced through his rules. Even with Xiao Han's help, it was enough to show that he was extraordinary. But this extraordinary was still a little different from what everyone had imagined. Perhaps everyone's expectations of this disciple of the palace sovereign might have been a little too high. No matter how outstanding his talent was, he was only a little stronger than a second-class disciple. He was still a direct disciple, and his talent was not much different from Ning Tianxing and the others. It was only because he was one realm lower that his defeat was normal. But at this moment, many people had already remembered what Ning Tianxing had said before. Was Qin Hao's talent really worthy of the number one person of the Divine Palace? Judging from this battle, the number one person seemed to be a little unworthy of the title. Lord Migrez's eyes swept across the field, and he could feel the subtle changes among the disciples. Many people began to question Qin Hao's ability, but because of the name of the palace sovereign's disciple, no one dared to say it. Oh, this is considered the number one person of the Divine Palace. Ning Tianxing smiled faintly and with a condescending attitude, looked at the person who fell to the ground, who had the appearance of Qin Hao. His tone seemed to be full of a kind of unbearable, and he continued, "The number one person of the Divine Palace, I, Ning Tianxing, have learned." Eastern Sky's face suddenly sank, and the Nirvana Emperor's will in his body suddenly erupted. Eastern Sky. Migrez stopped him, and only then did Eastern Sky disperse the Emperor's will. "What do you want to say?" Migrez closed his eyes and opened his mouth, obviously speaking to Qin Hao himself. "I try my best." Fa Xiang responded with a gentle smile. Although it was seriously injured, there was no trace of blood. This was because it was originally someone else's Fa Xiang body. The moment the voice fell, Qin Hao's body gradually became transparent, as if it was about to return to nothingness. Finally, because of the exhaustion of spiritual power, he turned into a dragon and flew toward the chief disciple's team, disappearing into Showuk's body. Suddenly, the crowd in the field was in an uproar, and the disciples of the Seven Peaks all looked on in shock. Was he dead? Was he seriously injured? Did Ning Tianxing not stop? Did he not have the intention to learn from each other, but to kill Qin Hao fiercely? I didn't. Ning Tianxing was also a little panicked. He couldn't bear the crime of killing a disciple of the palace sovereign. Although he had the intention of teaching Qin Hao a lesson so that the other party would understand the gap between them, Ning Tianqing absolutely didn't dare to kill Qin Hao. Moreover, Lord Migrez and the other 6 peak masters were present. If he had the intention to kill, it was impossible for him to sit back and watch. But why? Are you still unwilling to stand up and explain? Little 3, did I indulge you too much and let you think that you can do whatever you want in the Divine Palace? Migrez suddenly let out a roar, and his old eyes opened. They were sharp and unstoppable, shooting directly at Showuk. At this moment, Showuk's appearance changed under the roar. Under the shocked gaze of the disciples of the 7 Peaks, he returned to his original appearance and became Qin Hao again. Then, he turned to Ning Tianqing and smiled. That's right, what you defeated was only my doppelganger. Chapter 1530. What he had defeated was merely a clone. As soon as he said that, the training hall fell into a dead silence. Everyone looked at Qin Hao, and their hearts stopped beating. 2 seconds later, they began to tremble violently. The one who had fought with Ning Tianqing was only a clone. A clone had broken his Emperor-level rules. A clone had taken on Qingji Han's Infernal Thunder head-on. Even so, the moment the Infernal Thunder dissipated, the Swift Spear had almost taken Qingji Han's life. Infernal Thunder. Infernal Thunder was the most ferocious thunder technique. It was difficult to find 1 out of 10,000 Thunder Souls, but a clone had taken it on. If Ning Tianqing had not sacrificed the 9-tailed Phantom Fox in exchange for the life of the Princess of the East Continent, no one knew who would have won in the end. What a domineering foundation. Then, how strong was Qin Hao's original body? At this moment, everyone in the training hall was shocked. A clone had fought against 2 emperors, and his original body had not even reached the emperor level. It was simply, I don't understand why you did this. You used a clone to confuse everyone, and your original body pretended to be Showuk. You even defeated Feng Qianli and won the peak seat for him. Now, I just want to ask, where's Wuk? Daozong asked. Qin Hao had pretended to be Showuk and participated in the competition for the chief disciple position of Daozong Peak. Of course, this was not because he was afraid that Showuk could not win, but because there must be something else. Boom! The disciples were shocked again. They realized that Qin Hao had replaced Showuk and defeated Feng Qianli, who was at the same level as him, even though he had lost a part of his strength. Forming a clone was to divide one's origin cultivation. Although the clone had the advantage in numbers, it weakened the original body. Qin Hao's body was incomplete. Moreover, he did not dare to use his natal soul power at that time. He only dared to respond with sore intent, but he still defeated Feng Qianli. Feng Qianli had touched the rules. His cultivation level was slightly higher than Qin Hao's, but he was still defeated in the end. At this moment, the 7 Peaks disciples weren't just looking at Qin Hao with shock. Many of them were also looking at him with fear. Was he a monster? Feng Qianli's expression was naturally ugly. In that battle, he had been dragged into the intent realm and suffered a crushing blow. It was not what the disciple had imagined. Qin Hao had erupted with his natal soul force. However, it was true that he had divided a portion of his power. At that time, Qin Hao's body had a certain flaw, but in the end, he was still able to crush him. Feng Qianli had to admit that Qin Hao was really strong. He definitely lived up to the title of number 1 in the Divine Palace. In the Battle of the Yaoguang Peak's first seat, Chang Helo is at the Renhuang Plain and has comprehended the fledgling form of rules. He could not resist Qingji Han at all. What resistance? You'll be crushed. But one of Qin Hao's doppelgangers forcefully pierced through Ning Tianqing's emperor rules. The disciples of the 7 Peaks looked at each other. The more they thought about it, the more frightened they felt. Everyone had a scale in their hearts that could measure things. Ning Tianqing's strength was definitely not weaker than Qingji Han's. Facing an emperor-level genius, Chang Helo had been crushed. One of Qin Hao's doppelgangers had endured the bombardment of the Infernal Thunder and had almost killed him. Through this comparison, It was enough for everyone to understand what a terrifying existence Qin Hao was. To put it bluntly, Chang Halo and Qin Hao are not on the same level at all. What if Qin Hao stepped into the Emperor realm? How strong would he be if he entered the Emperor realm? Everyone's faces turned pale in an instant. They recalled the meaning of Ning Tianxing's words. Qin Hao's title as #1 in the Divine Palace did not live up to his name. Now, who would dare to doubt him? One of his doppelgangers had broken Ning Tianxing's rules of Emperor will. Qin Hao, answer us. At this time, perfected Lord Daozong's roar rang out in the training hall. Migres was not the only one who had discovered that he was pretending to be Showwuk. In fact, the 7 peak venerables, including Eastern Sky, had seen through his disguise. But no one said a word. This was because Qin Hao was a core disciple of the Divine Palace, and a key seedling jointly cultivated by the 7 peaks. He shouldered the responsibility of passing down the legacy of the sect. Since he was a disciple of the Migres Palace, no one would doubt him. But he owed the 7 elders an explanation. Qin Hao took a deep breath. His emotions were extremely complicated, but now he could no longer hide it. It was time to tell them everything and personally tear apart the illusion of the Divine Palace. Even though he felt as if a knife had sliced through his heart and the pain spread, he had to let the 7 peak venerables know that they were all dead people. Master, Uncle Master Daozong, Uncle Masters. Actually, Qin Hao was about to explain everything. Boom, boom. The earth shook and the mountains shook as the giant peaks sank. It was as if a destructive force had hit Uni Peak. At this moment, the stone slabs under everyone's feet were all shattered. The cracks in the ground were like tentacles, spreading in all directions. The scene was terrifying. Many disciples were faced with this sudden change and screamed subconsciously. Uni Peak under their feet was the strongest peak in the Divine Palace. It was reinforced and shrouded in tens of thousands of arrays. The strength of an emperor could not be shaken in the slightest. Ning Tianxing, Qing Jihan, and Xiao Han were very strong. When they fought, the stone slabs that could not be damaged by the aftershocks were shattered at this time. One could imagine how powerful the roar just now was. Not good, the erase source. The atmosphere of panic spread. The person who reacted the fastest was undoubtedly the master of Uni Peak, the world's #1 array master, perfected Lord Uni. At this moment, his expression changed greatly. His body twisted and disappeared. In the next second, his aura descended on a mountain behind Uni Pavilion. That was where the array source of Uni Peak was located. It was also where the power source of the enchantment of the entire Divine Palace was located. Whoosh, whoosh, rays of light flashed, and the rest of the peak venerables were not much slower than Taoist Uni. They all teleported towards the source of the formation, and each of their auras was extremely hurried. They were very clear that if the source of the formation was damaged, misfortune would befall the palace. Let's go. Eastern Sky's movement technique was very fast. He grabbed Qin Hao's arm, and the two disappeared together. Zhang Yu pulled Xiao Han through the air and brought her to the scene of the incident. The other chief disciples of the peaks were also panicking. But at this moment, they also protected the most outstanding disciples of their sects and chased in the direction of Uni Pavilion. The remaining disciples of the 7 peaks either took to the air in groups or tore through space. All of them rushed to Uni Pavilion. The entire Dao Peak was filled with an ominous aura. Something big might happen today. In the mountain behind Uni Pavilion, there was a stone pillar that reached the sky. Looking down from above, it was located in the center of Uni Peak. It was like a central axis that maintained the operation of the Dao Peak. The stone pillar was pure white and flawless. It exuded a mighty divine aura, like a supreme scepter that suppressed all demons in the world. But now, there were many cracks on the jade pillar. Where the cracks appeared, there was a black liquid seeping out. It was like black blood that exuded a terrible stench. When Qin Hao and the others rushed over, they saw Yun Yi surging with endless platinum light and releasing waves of Nirvana Law Dao Will. He kept hitting the cracks on the jade pillar. Yun Yi had expended a lot of energy. His face was red from holding it in. Not only him, but the other six peak masters were the same. They released Nirvana Law, Tao Will, and shot out beams of platinum light, pouring their energy into the jade pillar. What a sin! What a sin! Perfected Lord Yun, he shook his head in pain. His bloodshot eyes emitted a terrifying light as he glared at the five miserable figures not far away. The five figures were Shou Wuk of Daozong Peak, Zhou Wudao of Daozong Peak, and Lei Jiao of Mizang Peak. There was also Qin Hao's two ancient centaur beasts. Yin Yi's eyes were filled with murderous intent. If not for the fact that these five people were related to the Divine Palace, he would have killed them on the spot. Sigh. Perfected Lord Daozong looked at Shou Wuk and Zhou Wudao and sighed. He did not expect that his two disciples would cause such a disaster. Of course, the person behind the scenes might be Qin Hao. Only Qin Hao could drive Shou Wuk and Zhou Wudao's abilities. No wonder Zhou Wudao did not say anything during the chief disciple competition on Daozong Peak. He must have been a puppet illusion used to confuse everyone. Only Xiao Han could create such a lifelike illusion. Her crown origin spirit was extremely rare. It was the soul of all spells and had strong mental interference. Perfected Lord Daozong had not fully understood what kind of existence the crown origin spirit was. At the very least, it was not inferior to Qingji Han's Eye of Nirvana. It turned out that Xiao Han did not use her full strength when fighting Qingji Han and Ning Tianxing. But that was no longer important. Qin Hao created a clone and pretended to be Shou Wuk. Xiao Han helped to create Zhou Wudao's illusion in order to destroy the Divine Palace's array source. Did they want to destroy the Divine Palace? Why? None of the old peak venerables could understand. They were all good seedlings and the disciples they had nurtured with all their hearts. Who would have thought that they would do such a disgraceful thing? Moreover, they took advantage of the Seven Peaks Tao discussion. At that time, they did see that Qin Hao was pretending to be Shou Wuk, but no one cared about what the real Shou Wuk was doing. Everyone's attention was on the Tao discussion. It was a grand event for the Divine Palace. Taking a step back, the Seven Peak Venerables did not dare to imagine that Shou Wuk would bring people to destroy the array source. Are you okay? Qin Hao ran to Shou Wuk and checked their injuries one by one. Shou Wuk, Zhou Wudao, Lei Jiao, and Ah and Huang brothers were all heavily injured in order to destroy the array source. After all, none of them knew anything about arrays. They were fighting with their lives on the line. Now that it's like this, I don't want to say anything. Anyway, our lives are in your hands. Whether we can survive or not is up to you. Lei Jiao sat on the ground, lightning flashing around his body. He was suppressing his injuries. Before the Tao discussion began, Qin Hao met the team from Daozong Peak on his way to Uni Peak. At that moment, he knew that he could not delay any longer. Therefore, he inexplicably attacked Zhou Wudao, secretly told him everything, and gave him the 12 battle suits. He let Zhou Wudao distribute them to everyone. Finally, he and Shou Wuk destroyed the array source of the Divine Palace. Only by destroying the array source would Qin Hao feel a little better. Although he did not know whether it would work or not, it was more or less comforting. He was the only disciple of the Migres Palace. He was too conspicuous. Eastern Sky had been watching him. Qin Hao could not get away to communicate with everyone. He could only entrust Zhou Wudao to contact the geniuses in private. Anyway, this kid had made a heavenly covenant. If Qin Hao died, he would die. He was not worried about betrayal. Otherwise, how could he hand over the interspatial ring and the 12 battle suits? Of course, Zhou Wudao did not disappoint Qin Hao. Not only did he distribute the battle suits one by one, but he also brought Shou Wuk and Lei Jiao to destroy the array source. Lei Jiao came from the East Continent's Thunderpool Palace. He had been tempered by thunder since he was a child. His physical strength was comparable to Qin Hao's. Except for Ning Tianxing and Qingji Han, his talent was already at the top of the Divine Palace. His thunder attacks were overbearing and fierce. Of course, he was the most suitable candidate to destroy the array source. Zhou Wudao had two souls. His Taotai soul could swallow everything in the world, so absorbing the power of the array was not a problem. Even if he could not swallow it all, he could at least make a crack or cause the array to become chaotic. Showuk was even more so. He was born with the rules of the sword. Only his sword could pierce the array core, but it was only a possibility. His heart was heavy and oppressive. Even though his master was just a remnant soul, he had still taught him for 3 years. What I want to do? Don't you all see it clearly? I don't have the guts to destroy the divine palace. What I did was just to survive. Survive? The elders of the 7 peaks were all stunned. Ha ha! Migres let out a burst of laughter. He looked at Qin Hao and said, "Do you think that someone in the divine palace wants to harm you? Is it me or your 6 martial uncles? You want to destroy the array source. Do you know what kind of disaster will happen if the heavenly jade pillar is destroyed and Uni Peak collapses?" Disaster? Qin Hao's eyes flashed with confusion. He was just trying to protect himself. How could there be a disaster? You have been in the divine palace for 3 years and should focus on cultivation. We haven't had time to warn you that this is a forbidden place in the divine palace. Taoist scripture sighed. Uni Peak was the strongest of the 7 peaks, not only because it was covered with thousands of arrays and was the source of the divine palace's enchantment. More importantly, this peak actually suppressed countless evil spirits, which were existences that even the 7 peak venerables feared. It has been tens of thousands of years since the divine palace was founded. There are amazing talents in every generation of disciples. Like you, they're all overlords among the emperors. Of course, there are also great demons. No matter how talented the disciples are, there are still some who can't escape from their selfish desires. Those people have completely lost their Tao heart and deviated from the right path. They have become selfish and self-centered. In order to reach the highest level of the divine level, they have fallen into depravity and turned into devils, including some of the old venerables who were once extremely powerful. Speaking of this, true Lord Taoist scripture glanced at Changhe Lo in the crowd. Changhe Lo felt a demonic seed growing in his heart. But this person could still be saved, so Tianquan punished him to the Dustfall platform for Changhe Lo's sake, to let him cleanse his Tao heart. But in the divine palace, the believers who had become evil spirits for generations were completely hopeless. If they didn't destroy and suppress them, they would steal the Tao of others and kill people to fulfill their own Tao. This heavenly jade pillar suppresses the disciples who have betrayed the faith of the divine palace and the remnant souls of the peak venerables who have become demons. In every generation, there are people who have fallen to become demons. As a result, the seniors of the divine palace killed them here and buried their souls in Uni Peak. Taoist scripture sighed. Now, Qin Hao had instigated Showuk and the others to come and destroy the jade pillar. Then, the souls of the deceased who had been buried here for generations would escape. At that time, it wouldn't just be the divine palace that would be destroyed, but the entire continent would be turned into a hell of blood. The obsession of the souls was too strong. Countless generations of seniors of the divine palace wanted to destroy them, but they couldn't and could only suppress them here. Over time, the array of Uni Peak became more and more like it was today. It wasn't to show off that the array of Uni Peak was powerful, but if the array wasn't strengthened, the souls suppressed here would escape. Their strength was also increasing, and they didn't stop resisting for a moment. After hearing this, the disciples of the 7 peaks couldn't help but turn pale. It turned out that the divine palace was so terrifying, burying countless top monsters of the continent, as well as many old peak venerables who had stepped onto the evil path. If they were careless and allowed them to escape, the consequences would be, in an instant, everyone's gazes focused on Qin Hao alone. Why did he destroy the origin of the formation? So if there's such a thing in Uni Peak. Qin Hao took a deep breath. This was something he hadn't thought of before, but he didn't care. Facing the dignified and fierce gazes of the 7 peak venerables, he replied, "I'm not a saint, and I'm not the kind of person who is willing to sacrifice myself for the sake of the world. What I want is very simple. I want friends to accompany me, brothers to support me, and I want my loved ones to be safe. If Peak suppresses thousands of evil souls, I'll accept it because I can't let my loved ones and brothers die. So what if it was the people of the world? Others' homes were destroyed, and the continent was littered with corpses. It might be cruel, but if the people of the world wanted to harm Shao Han and his loved ones, Qin Hao would also become a demon and slaughter the world. Bastard! Tian Quan roared in anger. Demon? You're a demon. He shook his head bitterly, regretting that he didn't teach Qin how the great Tao of array formation. So, is this the reason you destroyed Peak? Yao Guang Xianjun's face was flawless, and even though her face was angry, she was still so beautiful that no one could bear to offend her. I said before that I didn't want to destroy Peak. I just want to leave with my loved ones and brother alive. Qin Hao said, Who wants to harm them? Is it me or Eastern Sky and Zhongyu? Tian Quan was really angry. He was the master of the divine palace. How could he not protect his disciple? Plop! Qin Hao knelt down and raised his head. His eyes were red as he said, Shizuan, in my life, I've only knelt to 4 people. My benevolent teacher when I was young, my father, and you. Don't play the emotional card with me. Tian Quan's eyes were also red, and there was a faint mist in them. Master, as an extreme Nirvana realm expert, how long do you live? Do you know the destiny? Qin Hao asked. Nirvana, Heavenly Emperor, lived for 2,000 years. I know the destiny. A deep voice sounded. Mizar War Sovereign said solemnly. When a martial artist entered the Heavenly Emperor realm, they had a lifespan of 1,000 years. When they entered the Heavenly Emperor realm, they could live for more than 1,000 years. But the specific length of their lifespan depended on the strength of their cultivation. Once they reached the Heavenly Emperor Nirvana realm, they would be able to live for 2,000 years. This was the limit of Nirvana realm within the rules of the Heavenly Tao. The so-called knowing the destiny meant that when a Nirvana Heavenly Emperor's lifespan was about to be exhausted, there would be a sign. Every Nirvana Heavenly Emperor knew their destiny. Then, if a Nirvana Heavenly Emperor dies, can their soul escape the Heavenly Tao? Qin Hao asked again. Under the Heavenly Tao, all things are like straw dogs. Heavenly Emperors are the same as mortals. At most, they can last a little longer, but not more than a few months. As their soul power weakens, they will still turn into nothingness. Perfected Lord Tai Wei said softly, with a helpless sigh. He was Dendi Nirvana realm, and he controlled the great Tao of life in the Divine Palace. Even if he was a heavenly emperor who had studied medicine all his life, he still couldn't escape the rules of the heavenly Tao. In addition, there is another possibility. Martial supremacies can gather their divine souls, but unfortunately, their divine souls are very fragile. However, if a heavenly emperor dies, they have full confidence that their soul can be reborn. As long as a suitable carrier is found, such as a treasure, the heavenly emperor can temporarily seal the heavenly emperor's soul inside and wait for the right person to appear. They can be reborn. However, after rebirth, their cultivation will have to start all over again. Perfected Lord Tai Wei said again. Under normal circumstances, Nirvana Heavenly Emperors disdained this path. Their cultivation had already reached the limit, and they were no longer able to see through the mysteries of the divine realm. Even if they were reborn, it was still the same. Most of the people who died chose to leave behind their inheritances, passing on their lifelong martial Tao insights to the future generations who were fated to use their insights to break through to a higher level. However, what did this have to do with Qin Hao destroying the array source? Uncle Master Yun, he said it in detail. Nirvana Heavenly Emperors have a lifespan of 2,000 years. Since they know the destiny, they can't escape reincarnation. Then why are Master and the other Uncle Masters still alive? Qin Hao looked straight at the 7 figures in the void. At this moment, his eyes were extremely sharp. Silence. A deathly silence. At this moment, the entire space seemed to have stopped, including the sound of heartbeats. At that moment, Qin Hao looked at Showuk. He had given him the choice. After all, once he stepped into the Divine Palace, he was no longer a member of the Divine Palace. Showuk's heart palpitated a few times. He looked at the Wuk Sword Sect disciples in the crowd with a sharp gaze. Members of the Southern Region Sword Sect stepped forward. Arhut Hall disciples stepped forward. Nightnet Palace disciples stepped forward. Slaying Sect disciples stepped forward. Aren't all of you coming over? Help me up. Late Wirm roared at his two junior brothers. Instantly, Luo Yuliang's men, Yi Yao's junior sister who had entered the Divine Palace, as well as the Zheng clan warriors and the slaying sect members led by Zhang Yi, gathered at Qin Hao's position. Qin Yun, Aku Tsiogwa, Si San Ke Chun Wanqin, Guden, including Tan Geng and Bai Xiaotong, all returned to Zhou Wudao's side. There were only a few of them when they came, but not a single one of them left. Feng Qinli did not stay either. Everyone gathered together. With Qin Hao's shout, nearly a third of the geniuses were mobilized. With this departure, many geniuses from the Seven Peaks were pulled away. The influence was terrifying. Ning Tianxing's heart palpitated. He never expected things to develop to this point. There was no time for him to adapt. Previously, everyone was still surprised by Qin Hao's performance, but in the next second, news of Yun E Peak's array source being destroyed was revealed. And now, Migrez was going to expel Qin Hao from the Divine Palace. Ning Tianxing was in a dilemma. Should he stay or leave? Qin Hao was a meticulous person. He would never make baseless claims, even if what he said was a little ridiculous. But now, all the sect from the Southern Mountain Range chose to believe him. This put Ning Tianxing in an extremely difficult situation. If he stayed, what if there really was a hidden danger in the Divine Palace? If the Seven Peak Venerables were undead, the thought of this scene made one's scalp tingle. It was too terrifying. But if Qin Hao's judgment was wrong, and now that he was expelled from the Divine Palace, no one would be able to shake Ning Tianxing's position among the remaining disciples. He would be the absolute number one and would be nurtured by the Seven Peaks. Cultivating to the Emperor realm was only the beginning. Ning Tianxing wanted to reach the Nirvana realm, or even the Divine Path in the Divine Palace. Princess, let's leave too. Mo Xian whispered to Qingji Han. Qingji Han's expression changed, and she hesitated for a moment. Seeing this, Mo Xian left with the 3 demon generals and a few Mo Luo family death servants. They walked toward Qin Hao's group. Mo Xian, where are you going? Han Qingji was shocked. He actually didn't wait for her to give the order and directly took them away. Just because of Qin Hao's one-sided words, Mo Xian dared to go against her. Even if he died, his soul must coexist with the Divine Palace. Get lost. Tian Quan's roar awakened Qin Hao. Let's go. Qin Hao didn't have time to salute his master. He held Xiao Han's hand tightly, and a pair of flaming wings spread out. He was ready to fly away from this strange place with everyone. However, at this moment, a scream broke through the space, as if piercing into everyone's heart. Subconsciously, everyone looked back. They saw a body sandwich between Tan Geng and Bai Xiaodong was penetrated by a palm. The palm was dripping with blood and emerged from Zhou Wudao's chest, penetrating his entire chest. It was extremely horrifying. The attacker was even more unexpected. It was the chief disciple of Daozong Peak, Shenghua. Shenghua sighed and shook his head. Pitiful, too pitiful. I destroyed their bodies, refined their way, and swallowed their spiritual souls, but they still left behind a wisp of obsession, trying to preserve the beauty in their hearts and carrying on the belief of the Divine Palace, continuing to cultivate disciples for me to absorb. His body gradually grew larger, and his short and weathered body was like a primitive giant standing between heaven and earth. His towering body could contain the sun and the moon. He shouted, "Eastern sky, take them away. With this remnant consciousness, I will shake the divine palace. With this remnant consciousness, I will shake the divine palace. With this remnant consciousness, I will shake the divine palace." Buzz. 7 Nirvana Emperor Chi filled heaven and earth, and an incomparably bright brilliance dispelled the haze of Uni Peak. The divine radiance shone outside the divine palace. At this moment, Mizar Zhanjuan also cast a Dharma body. His mighty body was full of battle spirit, and rays of golden light pierced through his 9 major acupoints. He activated the 9 palaces to fight Dili. He moved forward like a living god of war, holding a halberd in his hand. The halberd pierced through the void, and endless killing light shrouded Shenghua. With clanging sounds, Yao Guang deity sat cross-legged in the void. Her flawless face was still as beautiful as an immortal's. The sound of the great Dao Guqin spread out under her palm, and the more she played, the more the demonic chaos god turned into a roaring sound that seeped into Shenghua's spiritual consciousness. Taoist scripture, supreme secret, Xiantian, and even the old Taoist uni, even though they were just a wisp of remnant consciousness, none of them hesitated. They used their Taoist techniques without holding back, just to protect the safety of their disciples. Eastern Sky, Changyu, Izue, Shenghua, Zhanxiong, Tian Ke, and the chief disciples of the 7 peaks all moved. Rays of Emperor Light swept everyone up. Dili tore through the space, turning into a speeding meteor that could be seen with the naked eye, rushing out of the divine palace. "Leave? Do you think you can leave?" Shenghua raised his palm and clenched the void. Buzz. The enchantment that had originally trapped the divine palace appeared again. What was different from the previous enchantment was that it was a blood-colored light curtain that shrouded the sky of the divine palace. In the light curtain, one could clearly see the bodies of endless evil spirits dancing and laughing shrilly. Boom! Crack! The enchantment shrunk and kept shrinking toward Uni Peak. Heaven and earth shook and the void wailed. Those light balls that flew out were mercilessly repelled once they hit the light curtain of the enchantment. Eastern Sky and the others were like the 7 peak venerables. They were also existences of remnant consciousnesses. Although they could not use their peak cultivation when they were alive, they still retained a portion of the great emperor's power. Even so, under the enchantment, they could not escape even if they had wings. Boom! Hao Ian's hammer fell from the void, and then it was annihilated by Shenghua's evil power. Taoist scriptures will merge with heaven and earth.